Good evening. I, Council President Walsh, call the October 9th Council Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. As a reminder, in this day and age, everything is both in person and virtual, so we will have a remote component for the meeting tonight, both for staff members and potentially for community members who may make comments through that. So, as a starting point, I just want to acknowledge the day today. Take a moment. This is the observed Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Coast Salish people, and specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. So members of the tribe recognize and really celebrate today as specifically important to them because that was the date that they received federal recognition, which as a society would be very, very important. They, as a tribe, are still here, are thriving, and they're a sovereign nation. So despite all of those challenges, I think it's really important on this day to recognize how much stewardship they have done for the land upon which we now reside. So I just want to take a moment, recognize that as an important aspect of this day, which we are not a part of, but we are recognizing. So wanted to take that moment. Thank you. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There is going to be a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make public comments after the presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda items. We do have 2 items on tonight's agenda. That is ID 1510, Enhancing Permit Review Efficiency, and ID 1509, Policy, Funding, and Services on the Housing Continuum. So, members of the public may address the council at this time, again, either virtually or in person. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, if you're on the phone, you're going to press *3. If you're on a smartphone or computer, you're going to look for the hand icon or send a message to our host, and we'll get you in the queue there. If you're in the room and didn't sign up, I will look for other speakers, anybody who raises their in-person hand at that point after we've taken those that have signed up. So, clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak?
No one has signed up to speak. I see we have one member of the public with us virtually, but I don't see that they're indicating a desire to speak right now. And I believe all of our in-person attendees are city staff.
Which we appreciate coming and staying here, but you're right. You're probably not going to have many public comments for us, though. If you do, let us know. For anyone else, you can always give public comments by emailing citycouncil@issaquah.gov. So, going on, our first item then after public comments is ID 1510, Enhancing Permit Review Efficiency, and this is going to be presented by Minnie Dollywall, Community Planning and Development Director, and then we also have contributing staff from James Gray, our Building Official, Christian Geitz, our Planning Manager, and Emily Appleton, our Engineering Manager. Working on all of our presentations here. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. While we pull up our PowerPoint, we'll just take a minute to introduce our team who's here to talk about permit process improvements. So as you remember, during the budget process, we had discussions about a few things, related to what was funded for the upcoming biennial, and then a few items we were working on. And one of them was the permit process improvements that we said we will come back and share with you where we are and what improvements we've made and so forth. So community planning and development, multiple divisions within our department touch the permit process system. So today we have our managers, our leadership team, with James Gray, who's our building official, and from his team we have Jennifer and Juna, who do the building permit reviews And Jennifer has been with the city for 11 years, and this is her first time attending council. So she's very appreciative of seeing how all of this works. But also, their focus is mostly on safety, compliance with mechanical, plumbing, building code requirements that get very complex, but at the end of the day, it's really making sure that the structures being built in the city are up to code. Then we have Emily Appleton, our engineering manager here. All the managers will be presenting a portion of their meeting here. From her team, we have Stacy Rush, who has focused as stormwater and flood hazard permits. Then we have Patrick, one of our engineers, and Amy in the back, if you guys can raise your hand, who are also involved in the engineering review. So their focus looks at utilities, water, sewer connections to the structures, as well as erosion and stormwater and everything engineering related. Then come the planners. Christian Getz, I think you've met him before with Title 18. And from his team, we have Doug Yormick. His focus is environmental. We have Holly Keaton, our senior planner. And we have Dan Martinez and Valerie Porter. You saw some of these folks during the Title 18 update, and also our long-range planning manager for the second item on your agenda, Stephen Padua, is here. So I think now we're ready to launch our PowerPoint. So today we'd like to hear from council primarily to make sure that we're capturing your goals and priorities for the permit process improvements. We've identified what we heard previously and also through our work, timeliness, quality, which then we'll get into a little bit more specifics about. What we've identified in that item is efficiency, clarity, and consistency, how we apply our codes consistently. And then, of course, the cost recovery of how we set up a fee structure and how our revenue and expenditures are balanced. And then also we'd like to hear if there are any other ideas missing from the list that we've shared with you or any that you want us to prioritize over the others. And if anything else you want us to measure as an indicator of success. Next slide. So we did the introductions. Some of the folks that are not in here today, some of them are representing their other divisions, are our inspectors and administrative support. So our inspectors throughout the pandemic, came in every day and kept construction going. So we want to recognize their hard work as well. They are the folks that touch the permitting at the tail end. They are the folks that are actually out in the field facing these contractors where the pressure has built up and timeliness all comes out in front of them if folks are stressed about timeliness. So, later we'll talk about the entire permit process system, so I won't get too much into that. Next slide. So in addition to council's priorities, we also have a state bill that got passed in the last legislature, SB 5290, where the cities have to submit their annual performance reports to Department of Commerce. And we have to post on our website by March of 2025, but the time, and the recording of the time and how we're doing starts next year, 2024. Department of Commerce has also been charged to create a template and share it with the cities. We will have 28 days, which we currently have 28 days to determine if an application is complete. But what's also important with this bill is right now it's 120 days, regardless of the size of the project. It creates these 3 tiers, which requires 65 days for projects that do not require public notice, 100 days for projects that do require a public notice, and then 170 if a project requires a public hearing. If you don't meet these timelines, the cities are obligated to refund some of the fees. So we have started looking into what that means and getting ready for implementation of that as well. So on our dashboard, we track time for 6 different types of permit types. That is, I think, my understanding what council had previously looked at and asked how we're doing on that. We also, do this survey where we look at customers rate our services. So 76% to 70, almost 74%, customers of the people that were surveyed have said they rate our services positively. In addition to this citywide survey, Community Planning and Development reaches out to our applicants. We push out an email and get specific feedback from them, and we monitor that and make improvements based on the feedback that we hear from that. And even in that, the range of people satisfied ranges within that 60 to 70%. Next slide. Another item is percent of residents with positive perception of Issaquah's built environment. And I think the city set its target at 60%. We have exceeded that in 2023. So next slide. I think I'll pause here. So the way we're going to run this presentation today is I've launched off, introduced my team, and each of the community planning and development managers is going to take a piece. First up is going to be James Gray, our building official. He's going to talk through some of the data, what we've looked at the data, what the data is telling us, and what it's not telling us. And then we'll follow up with Christian Getz. He'll talk about the planning side of things. What does that look like? We'll wrap it up with Emily Appleton, our engineering manager, to kind of walk you through what we've done and what we plan to do. And then I'll weave in.
All right, thanks so much, President Walsh, members of the council. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having us here. I'm actually excited about this. I know that metrics and permitting probably sounds like the most boring thing ever, and folks probably think that we're just trying to make you all feel good, but I'm actually very interested in it because what we do is so critical to the beautiful nature of our city and to all the life safety elements that we enjoy. You're just seeing part of our team here that we're able to make it tonight. We have a really talented, hardworking team, and that's part of the reason why I'm excited to share with you what we're talking about. So the first slide that we want to go through is permits issued by year. So the reason we included this is just to give you an idea of the number of both building permits and land use permits that we deal with. Now, it's important to remember when you're talking about metrics, metrics can be difficult because there are permits that are applied in 1 year and then they're received in another year. They might be received 2 years later. You know, we want to move them as quickly as possible, just like the clients do. But it's important when you're talking metrics to remember if you're talking about application year or issuance year. So this particular slide is permits issued by year. So 2023, of course, is just year to date, and I think we did this data maybe as of September 15th, it might have been, and so it reflects permits that are issued in that month or in that year, but again, those are permits that many of them were applied for in the previous year. Next slide, please. Okay, so this little flow chart, I tried to keep it simple. I know it looks really ugly. It probably looks like a biology diagram, but in order to get permits in and to get permits processed and reviewed for the clients in both a timely manner and to meet all the requirements of state and federal law, ADA, all those things, Title 18, you got to have a process. And this particular process, and I won't read through every step of the process for you, but the piece I'd like to bring to your attention is on the right-hand side, the top block where there's two arrows, one going up and one going down. Those steps right there have to do with the rounds of review. So if we turn back a plan to someone with corrections, if you submit a design and we're like, hey, we think you missed this piece and you need to look at it again, we shoot it back to you, that's where it'll start back through that review process again. We cut down the time on the second review to half the time of the first one, and I think by the time we get to the third or fourth, we cut it down even more. The idea is that what we're really trying to do is get that thing approved. So that's red lines at that point. That's calling the client, meeting with the client to keep it from having to go through this loop too many times. Okay. So by discipline by year, so there are actually probably 12 different, we call them disciplines, that a permit might need to be routed to. For instance, Sammamish Plateau, they oftentimes need to review something based on water or engineering requirement. That I didn't include fire in here. I didn't include, sometimes things go to Chief Schwan with police. So these are the kind of the primary review disciplines for building, I'm going to call them building permits, but they're also land use. It's the kind of construction permits, and it'll give you an idea of how many of those review items happen each year by discipline. So won't spend a bunch of time on this. This is already on the city website. It shows you the metric. So this is what we call our target review time. So when someone calls me and says, how long is it going to take for me to get a plan review done, I refer them to this web page, and this is our target goal. This is the metric we're measuring it against that we're here for tonight with your question. Okay, and to the data. So before I jump straight into this slide, I want to say two things. One thing primarily, when we initially measured the metric of how long it takes to get your first review, the data that was scraped from the permitting system included the time from the time you apply till the time that, if I was reviewing it, till James Gray clicked approved or out for corrections, right? What we realized, and this is after all this information has been on the website and it's already in your packet and in your memo, but it's worth saying again, that time can vary wildly. For instance, when you apply for a building permit, the code requires that you pay for the plan review first because these are services that have to be reimbursed. Sometimes it happens that someone applies for a permit, we accept it, and then we give you an invoice to pay for it, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get paid for. I think we found one that was like a year and a half or something, and the applicant had been asked multiple times. We had the documentation about it. That's a rare exception, but it does happen where that number can go up to a week or 2 weeks. So before we put this data before you tonight, I wanted to cull out all that information from application to the first review. Because what the reviewers are responsible for is the time that we hit the button and track it, and Valerie will get a notice that says you've got a plan review, and then she has a clock that starts for her. But she can't really start that clock until she gets that. And we can't do that until it's paid for and some other things. Sorry to put too much time on that. So for these years, this is the number of times for a tenant improvement. Now, what we did on this one is I used there's small tenant improvements and large tenant improvements. And these are the small ones because we had to break these metrics out into different pieces. They're different time frames. The Costco towers, for instance, we have more time to review that on the first time than we do if somebody's doing a little remodel of, say, a fly fishing business. And so this is the small tenant improvement numbers for these particular years. Okay, same thing for new single families, routing to first review. So in 2023, we haven't had that many new single family dwellings that have come in, but a bunch of the single families from 2022 are still going on. For instance, big developments up in the Highlands, a lot of those couldn't get approved until, for instance, parks were done or till other civic infrastructure was done, and that's why you're not seeing that review time in 2023. And on our site work group, and Emily will talk about this a little bit more on detail on the engineering piece. Site work is if you just come in and do grading, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking beneath folks' level of understanding, but the terminology generally means something that's work on a site that's not associated with a building. If you wanted to just come in and prepare a multi-acre site to have some future development, you would have a site work permit. Those numbers really good. And this is our new commercial, routing to first review. So new commercial is a new commercial building, not a tenant improvement. This is a high rise. This is I'm thinking of, there was a new daycare going up in the Highlands, for instance. Those would be new commercial buildings. Again, those numbers are, look pretty close to the target line. Okay, so that was a quick blast through of just the data on a few of the categories. Again, you can split this metrics 100 different ways, but what we'd like to come up from that, I guess, what I'd like to say about that is what does the data tell me? Well, the data tells me when I filter out this time from application to first review, it tells us that it's actually not that bad. Now, if you're an applicant and it's taking 8 weeks to get your first review, that might seem not great. But there's a certain amount of backlog behind it, and we really do our best to do things in the order that they come in, because that's just the fairness of it. There are other pieces that are behind it. That's what the corrective measures is about. The other piece of this is our first year doing these metrics. So we're trying to get our arms around all of the greasy pieces of it, because there's lots of weird outliers, like that year and a half. If I look at that, if I plug that year and a half number in and I don't take the mean, it throws that month off completely. So a lot of this data really has to be massaged to give an accurate picture of what it looks like. And it's only a slice of the project. We have a bunch of other priorities besides just plan review. We have folks at a public permit counter. We have folks answering phone calls. You can, I think council knows, you can go on the internet and schedule a meeting with a planner, with a building official, with an engineer, and those meetings pop up throughout the day. So they kind of poke Swiss cheese holes in your schedule. So what we'd like to do is transition from tracking time only from the application to the first review. The time to the first review is important, but it's not the only thing that's important to clients, of course. Folks want to know, how long is it going to take to get my permit? The obvious question. And depends on a lot of factors. We have our piece that we need to keep together on it, but it also depends on how complete the package. So we would like to track total time that we have it in our hands, and weight that based on the number of reviews. If it takes 2 or 3 turns to get the thing done, I want to know how long the reviewers are taking to do that average per turn, right? And then also the total time to get the review, to get the permit. Even though there's some pieces in there that we can't control, I think it's still important to throw the whole thing in the bucket and say, well, really, how long does it take, even if we throw out the outliers? So that's our kind of a new proposed metrics. And that average time from application to permit issuance is something else that we need to look at more closely. Right now, we don't really have the ability. I don't want to bore you with gory details, and I'm probably already doing it, but these come in through a system called MBP, which is a regional-wide electronic system shared by multiple cities, and we have not a lot of control over how that thing gets in. So for me to pull a metric of when you actually put your application to when it gets on our dashboard is more difficult than it should be. So that's something we're also working on with our. I think we're going to transition into the planning piece of it, and I'd like to see if anyone has any questions they'd like to share first.
Okay, we've got a few questions. Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you very much for your section of the presentation. I have a handful of questions about this part, and I want to apologize in advance to staff for not getting my questions in early. It's been hectic since the beginning of Salmon Days. So on one of the earlier slides, you were talking about issuances by year for permits. I think it went back to 2020. I'm just curious if your sense is pre-COVID issuance levels are around the same, or are we kind of experiencing kind of a new post-COVID issuance era? What's your sense about that?
Josh, great question. Through the chair, we were tracking that pretty aggressively after COVID, because we thought it dropped off so precipitously. Not only were people couldn't come into the building, but they just weren't building because oftentimes they didn't have the staff, people were sick. And I guess I'm just speaking anecdotally, I've noticed that it's been kind of a lull, but it's back up and climbing. I think if you looked at the numbers from say 2018 to 2023, and you threw out what we call whale projects like Costco towers and the REI projects and those things, you're probably seeing a general increase that's still moving along. And I think that's going along with what I'm hearing about sort of economic development in the area.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's helpful context. You talked about applicants wanting to know how long is it going to take for me to get my permit. It depends on how complete the package is what you were saying. So when staff identify a mistake, actually, can you go back to what was it? It was the kind of flow chart slide. You were talking about either going up or going down. So if a correction is required, at that point, has the entire application been reviewed by staff, or do we, as like a mistake is noticed, do we let them know while we're still reviewing the rest of the application?
That's an excellent question, and there's a couple of pieces to that. So first of all, we want to make sure your package is sufficient before we allow you to submit it. And the reason for that is if everything is stacking up. So the prime reviewers are grabbing the next thing on the list, the next thing on the list. And if it actually is 8 weeks until I get to your project, and I knew right up front that you were missing half of what I needed to do to even look at it, I'd want to tell you that up front. So we do a sufficiency process to try to the best of our ability to make sure that those minimum documents are there. Okay, so then the next question is, let's say there's 6 different disciplines that have to review it. We don't release the comments until all 6 of those reviewers have completed their reviews. And the reason we do that is because we use a system called Bluebeam, and it's active editing. And so if let's say I'm your building reviewer and I get done and then I release that and you start working on it and you upload new documents, maybe engineering hasn't gotten to it yet, and then the plans have changed. It's versioning, it gets really complicated. So we're generally trying to get everybody across the finish line under the target time we talk about tonight, but also it's kind of in the same group. As soon as those reviews are done, as soon as humanly possible, then our permit techs, and Jennifer's here tonight, they will send that whole batch of comments to you along with a digital set of the drawings that you have all the comments right on the drawing.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I was wanting to make sure, yeah. And the slides about tenant improvements, routing to first review, and then also just kind of a general question as you had said that we review in the order that they come in as a general rule of fairness. So for tenant improvements, you said the clock doesn't start until the applicant pays, and there was kind of this process that you were talking about. That and reviewing in the order that they come in, we find that these are kind of common permitting practices in cities in the region? We're not doing anything as an outlier here, are we?
No, absolutely. And I'm in regular communication with the building officials across the region. Most of us have some sort of kind of a cost recovery component, and so we need to get paid before that effort starts. The cities don't fund their building departments without those revenues. And I'm say building department, I mean the whole plan review effort, talking about building. So your question was, it's not just tenant improvements, it's all building, all construction permits. You have to pay for the plan review piece of it. Now, you don't pay all the fees because the permit fee isn't paid until the permit is ready to be issued. And also if there's impact fees, there might be, what other types of fees? You have to get a separate permit for a sprinkler system install or modification as an example. That's a separate permit through Eastside Fire. So that you would do separately from your building permit.
Okay, thank you. And then the kind of reviewing in the order they come in, that's also a common practice among permitting.
It is common, and I'm saying this a little little bit of hesitation because there are some projects that they might be on the same, so it might be a small tenant improvement, right? And a small tenant improvement might be, I'm adding a 3-compartment sink because the health department needs me to have one because maybe all I do is make coffee. I don't cook or anything, but the health department requires me to have a 3-compartment. It's a pretty small, easy to do permit, but it's in the same time frame as a tenant improvement to maybe remodel this council chamber, which is a much bigger deal. So if you called me and said, hey, and this occurs, we just need to put in this 3-compartment, we'll pull it up, and we will often grab those out of order because the level of simplicity of them, it just doesn't take, it might not take all discipline reviewers. Like a little 3-compartment sink, planning's not going to need it, right? It's just going to be building and maybe engineering.
Councilmember Hunt?
Thank you. In the staff report, there is a list of the timelines that are required by the state law, Section 7 of SB 5290. And the first one, for example, is 65 days for projects that do not require public notice. How they track time to issue the permit line up with your recommended ways of tracking the time to issue the permit?
And I would turn it back to Minnie.
Yeah, good question. So Department of Commerce is still working through the bill. They have told us that they're going, all the cities, that they're going to be providing some guidance on some of those specifics, but also that state bill, it's our understanding the completeness would apply to the building permits, but otherwise it's only for the land use permits, not for the construction permits. So there's still a lot of confusion about what that means, and the Department of Commerce, as part of this bill, was charged with coming up with guidance for the cities. So we're figuring that out.
Okay, so it's currently unclear then if, for example, you could track from the time you received the payment to the time it was permitted?
I believe it's from the time you apply to the issuance. That's how our interpretation is at this time, is when you apply, it happens parallel, those fees will be paid occasionally, like James was saying, there may be a lot of time lag between payment, and that could be a point of issue. But I think as we look through that process, we want to have the completeness and the payment all done at the same time. So we could front load our completeness and payment. When we send the invoice, we could say, by the way, you're also missing these other 3 things, and pay the fee. So that's one way to kind of make sure we do it front end.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Joe?
Thank you. Director, under 5290, the planning, the Department of Commerce will be offering a couple of opportunities to get grants for either technical assistance or to help local governments update paper permit processes. Are we going to be going after any of those grants, do you think?
We will if we qualify for them, absolutely. Some of the things the city is doing really well is, and through even before the pandemic, we have a good, digital system in place. And we participate in the eCity Gov. James spends a lot of time, Keith Toomey from my department. It's a consortium of cities that get together and have put together what he talked about, mybuildingpermit.com. So it's easier for the construction folks to have the same portal. If they get a permit from Issaquah or Kirkland or, or Bellevue, they're all part of that. So that's the online portal, what they see. Then each of the cities has its own electronic system where we have track it. And that's where a lot of money is spent. We didn't make any, requests during the budget cycle because we felt it was in the next few years we're set. But technology changes as it evolves. I mean, that's $700,000, $400,000. That's a big ticket item that the cities look at in the future. At this time, where our focus is more on cleaning up the data and making sure things are set up and the process and procedures are in place, than going with a new permit system. But
Okay.
for smaller cities that don't have the digital stuff might go for those grants more.
I understand, thank you. So just to summarize, you may go for the grants if you find that there's a reason to upgrade the system, but at this time you're focusing on the implementation of 5290 itself and the details there.
We'll be keeping an eye out for what the grants are for and determine.
Okay. Just one compliment before I lose you during the rest of this presentation, but the permitting center was one of the first ones to open up with counter personnel there, and I want to thank you for doing that. It really made a difference in terms of the customer service that we were hearing about from people that are in the industry. So I'll just thank you for that. It was during COVID. It was during a difficult period, but we were open and King County was not. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a hardworking staff. I mean, they rotate through with their telecommute policy, but we are open 5 days a week, 9 to 4, so, which I think some cities are still trying to figure all of that out. Thank you.
Great. I'll just ask my questions before we move on to the next one. So if we go back to the flow chart, do we have a sense of what percentage of the permits require corrections? And then generally, how many rounds of corrections?
A lot. I think that's, I have yet to see, the staff may be able to kind of tell me if I'm wrong. It's rare to see the project comes in without a correction letter and getting approved the first go around. Is that sort of my correct assessment? Yes.
Oh, that's a lot of nods. A
Yeah.
lot of nods.
Yeah. And
Okay,
so-
appreciate that.
Yep.
Is that normal compared to other cities?
I mean, getting one correction letter is pretty normal for a lot of cities. Getting 3 correction letters, not so normal for a lot of cities. So I think we have to go back and ask sometimes the same stuff over again because they didn't get a good response or whatever. So the rounds of review, sometimes we feel like, it's asking the same stuff, but sometimes they submit something and the new stuff comes up. So that's a little bit more on the more side for us in terms of how many times we have to send a correction letter.
Appreciate that. I think those outliers are really important to recognize. Okay, any other questions before we move on to section 2?
Evening, Council. Good to see you again. I might be a little more excited than James about my topic. Love getting into the weeds on land use. So I'm here to talk about the Planning Division and what they do. First off, they review both land use and building permits, same as a plans examiner. They're going to look at the building aspects of a land use permit. So when you saw the chart before on how many reviews by division, all the divisions are looking at all different types of applications, building permits and land use permits. Land use planners, they look at that variety of land use applications primarily. They review them. They also manage those cases. So those are everything from short plats to variances to site development permits that incorporate management of peer reviewers, consultants that are doing review, handling public meetings and public comment, making sure that the community receives those. They also play a very important role within the permit center, as do the other staff. This is just a snapshot of the land use applications by type. So the list there on the left runs through a variety of land use permit applications that we might see. The chart on the right identifies the number of permits applied for. So you'll see that these numbers aren't going to line up with the numbers on the third slide or so that James, or the slide James started with. That was permits issued. You'll see these numbers kind of fluctuate as they take time to work their way through the system, work their way through review, meetings, public hearings, potentially appeals before they finally get to that approval stage. And we've been pretty steady, looking at around 70 to 80 per year land use application types. And then the issuance side of things was right around the 40. We're at just under that year to date for land use decisions issued. So, but again, that does cover that wide range. So smaller, larger projects mixed in there. So the items that I'm going to look at off the dashboard, short plats and preliminary plats. Short plats cover, in this data, the division of land into 4 or fewer lots. Preliminary plats, 5 or more. The new Title 18 update lifted that level up to 9. So 9 or fewer is what we'll have in the future. Short plats, 10 or more for preliminary plats. And as you can see on this slide and the next one, the numbers fluctuate as far as the number within the column, how many short plats we received, as well as where that landed according to the first review target. And again, this is first review routing to first review. So the moment that application is deemed complete, which is that line within the sand that the state law identifies, complete application to end of project, we're looking at complete application. We distribute that out to all the reviewers, fire, sand plat, engineering, building, planning, and consultants. So this is reflecting that on short plats we were above and below across the board. You can see a high number of 10 short plats in 2017, followed by a year of not so many, but a lot of that might have been a trickle over as that staff was. And then this shows the preliminary plats kind of fluctuating across the years. I went back through and looked at every notice of application to drill down into the data to find out, are we looking at this correctly? We want to make sure that we're presenting the information to you and to the public that shows when an application is complete and it can actually be reviewed and when that gets distributed out. So someone's clicked the button to send it off to all the different reviewers, they start going. And this is the updated information that shows where we are above or below the 12-week target line. Again, this is our 12-week target for first review. By doing this on a preliminary plat, you're going to be in much better shape down the line to achieve that 120 current day, or the future would be 170 days. So you'd be well ahead of the target. Enough time to get those comments back out to the applicant. Work through. So the data does show that we're kind of fluctuating up and down, but it did show an incomplete picture. So that's really what we want to kind of look at. We've shifted everything with Title 18 from 0 to 6 levels of review to a 1 to 5. So the recommendation is to really look at 1, 2, and 3 and above. So 3 and above levels, that's going to align with the 5290 State Bill 170-day final target, in-house days that we've got it. The level 2 review is going to be the public notice, but no public hearing. That's the 100 days. And then level 1 is 65. So we want to make sure that we can track that, make sure our first review targets, which we'll have to adjust shorter for level 1s, if it's on a non-public notice project, we get that out so that when we get it back in, we've got a shorter turnaround where we're achieving those deadlines. And likewise for the 2 and 3. So looking to expand the metric to include that, looking at it from first review to when that review is completed, and then also incorporating the state law chart at the bottom, which we don't know what that's going to look like. We'll get a lot of direction from Commerce on what we'll have to report, which will be the same as Bellevue and Redmond, and every year there'll be a nice chart that shows who's on time, who's not on time. That's apples to apples. That is what I have for you. Quick nutshell. Here for any questions.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you for that presentation. We were talking about the data a little bit and how there can be kind of outliers, and someone didn't come in and pay the fee for 120 days or what have you. If we have numbers that are, kind of outliers, has Commerce given us any guidance on how those might be corrected, or you can put an asterisk by it to explain why it might be off by such a wide margin?
Right. And I think that's where the clarity from Commerce on complete application is important. Critical that we understand that means you've provided all the information. It may still need some corrections, but you've provided all the information and submitted the fee for that review. That is the question that a lot of jurisdictions are wanting to make sure we have that clarity on, so that we do start that clock. We still have our completeness review 28-day window. Once that is completed, then we begin our 6,570.
So it sounds like you'll be, or all the jurisdictions will be working with Commerce to find a fair way to measure those in terms of the things that you can control versus the things that are out of your control.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt?
Thank you. I want to make sure I understand correctly, since there's a couple laws with a bunch of different timelines here. The current law is the 120-day timeline, that requirement. That's currently in place. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes.
From the state. Okay. And so then this table, which is the table, it's the same table that's on your screen, but also page 6. It has, for example, 2022, there were 8 permits that were issued after that. So those were not meeting that requirement.
Correct. Yeah, this reflects what the state requires us to be reporting annually right now.
Okay. And for the new bill that comes into place in 2025, there you have to potentially refund some portion. Is that currently?
That goes into effect January 1st of 2025.
Okay, so if we exceed the 120-day timeline, currently there is not a refund requirement?
Correct.
Okay, so it's a reporting requirement, but not a refund. Okay. And I guess the last question I had is, do we know how this compares to other cities in terms of how many other cities are missing the proportion of the timeline?
We haven't looked at the other jurisdictions closely. We can dig into that and find that information. That's part of their requirements as well. Back to council.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think I'll go through a couple slides and then turn it over to Emily. So we took a deeper dive into the data. There are a few things that the data tells us. There are some things that we can parse out from the data. We sliced and diced it in different ways, but there were a few themes that kind of resonated. But I'll touch a few that were things that we see, not necessarily directly correlated from the data. The complexity of some of the projects. We have sites that have critical areas. We had design standards in the past that were more split in different places. Now that we've consolidated, that will help. But some of these projects, may seem simple, but when you start digging into some of these complexities, they get complex pretty quickly. So that's one. We can't really give you data about how many of them, but a lot of them fall in that category. The other theme that we saw was incomplete or partially complete submittals, and Emily will talk about what we're doing about those things, and helping the applicants really understand from the get-go. If you're doing a tenant improvement and for 100% of them you're missing that you have this additional code you need to meet, we heard that from our staff. So we want to make sure that's getting communicated to them early. Of course, the past year or so, Title 18 update, that took time to get for staff that was involved in that. Multiple reviewers, and some of the review teams are small, so we're working on cross-training so that if one person's, becoming the point person on one thing, that knowledge is spread amongst others, and they can pick up the weight of and spread it around. Next slide. Permit volumes, we had anecdotally thought that spring is the peak because everyone's getting ready to do the summer work, and then we would see a huge peak. Not necessarily. The volumes fluctuate, and we didn't find one pattern that really showcased that, oh, we really missed this deadline during the holiday time or during the peak summertime. There wasn't anything we could garner from the data on those. Other responsibilities, I think some of the managers talked about it, hearings, community meetings, counter duty, training, phones, interdepartmental coordination, which are extremely important for the organization, for us to provide that customer service. But I think the direction is we figure out our priorities, and permit reviews are a priority, and then we kind of work through that. Other agencies outside the city, we touched base on fire department, SAMPLAT, those are agencies that also are involved in the permit review. Consultants, we do send out peer review for our critical area. Noise sometimes comes up, lighting comes up, when they're more complex, structural review for building that needs an expertise. We do pass through those costs to the applicant. But in order to increase the bench so that we weren't at the mercy of a couple of people who were, too backlogged, they could never go on vacation. So we've done an RFQ and increased the number of consultants. So if someone's, really booked, then we have other options to go to. We have excellent consultants. They do a really great work for the city. But we just wanted to make sure that we were making sure that that wasn't becoming a bottleneck for us. The other thing we found was, we weren't sending stuff to the consultants right away. So we've started doing that where everything is happening parallel. So it's not waiting for the reviewer to open it up on, in the middle of the review when a month has gone by. So some of those things I think we're looking at. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Director Dalwell. Good evening, Council President Walsh and members of the council. I'm Emily Appleton. I manage the engineering group in our CPD department, and I realized as we're going through here, I should have put a slide in there about the engineering group. I could talk about them a little bit, but they do all sorts of different reviews on all sorts of different projects, and we'll probably touch on some of those as we go through the rest of the presentation. So after we recalibrated and analyzed the data that James and Christian talked about, and then considered all these factors that were impacting our review time, and then factoring in the requirements of the new state law for permit review times, we knew we needed to come up with strategies that would help us reduce the time it takes us to do our work while keeping the quality of our work high. This diagram up here shows one take on a typical project management triangle. I like it because it puts quality in the middle, in the center right there, and it illustrates how when you focus only on one of the corners of the triangle, or maybe not all three equally, you probably won't hit the center of the quality target. We used it as a symbol to help us remember that keeping quality high requires constant balancing of priorities. Here is shown by, cost, or which are resources to do the reviews and the work we do, scope, or all the things we need to accomplish or review for, and then time is the time it takes us to do our work. And so to guide our work towards that quality center and effectively balance all these competing priorities, we focused on increasing our efficiency, consistency, and clarity of our process and reviews. Some of the work that's been completed so far is listed here. As we mentioned, the data recalibration and cleanup for our accurate and efficient reporting that, helps increases the clarity of our timelines. Document management improvements that we've made. The SharePoint migration project, updated all of our, put all of our documents on a secure website, so it made collaboration easier. And we also has completed scanning. I think most of our paper files have been scanned, so it's a lot easier to retrieve the documents now. We've updated development regulations. Title 18 is the big one, but we've also updated our stormwater manual this year and the street transportation. The website improvements to date, we've made this updated information available on our website and tried to make it more easily found. The guidance documents have been added, and those are in the form of what we call client assistance memos, kind of like frequently asked questions, a lot of the same inquiries we were getting We put together a large number of these client assistance memos, which has all the information in there. So that will hopefully help increase the clarity for the applicants and also for the our permit application checklist and other outward-facing guidance. We updated all of that to help clarify and make sure it was consistent with our updated regulations. Our phase 1 update's complete, but that, as you'll see, is continuing. We updated all our review checklists for the other internal review for our review team. That's to help, keep our reviews consistent and make sure that everybody is clear on what their portion of the review is. We collaborated with our Public Works Department so we could get quicker responses to street frontage improvement questions. That was an issue that was identified in a customer survey, and occasionally one of the last issues to be resolved. And frontage improvements can be a big deal to a project because if you have to do different frontage than currently exists, it could impact your available property for development because it sometimes requires dedication of additional. So that's a good one to get resolved right up front because then you can really help the applicant their best. And as Director Dollawall mentioned, we did try to improve that peer review consultant availability. What we were finding is that occasionally we would have 1 or 2 consultants that were really overloaded, and that was impacting. So we, instead of having 1 or 2 consultants to select from, now we have 3 or 4, and we can spread the work around. Improving what we do and how we do it is a continuous iteration. This slide, shows a general continuous improvement cycle. I like to imagine it as an upward spiral, with each iteration or cycle improving on the last. With that in our minds, we can see how the work we've already completed can provide a foundation for our future improvement. Ongoing and planned improvements build on the previously completed improvements and will continue to increase our efficiency and consistency of permit reviews and provide more and more clarity for both our applicants. Our goal is to reduce the review times and have fewer rounds of review, shortening that overall without sacrificing quality. Our ongoing and planned improvements are shown here. We're increasing the clarity regarding which type of permits are necessary for different types of developments. We wanted to make sure there was a consistency in understanding when permits can be defined. This will simplify some common project types and create a consistent policy for the less common types. That'll help both the applicant and the review be more consistent in applying the policy and then more efficient in their reviews. We're going to continue to refine those checklists, reduce any redundant reviews and close any gaps in reviews that we find. And that's just going to be a continuous process. We'll continue to update our website as it happens. As we update our guidance documents, we post them on the website. As we reorganize things, we refine our website. We're also focusing a little bit on professional development, doing some training. One thing I think one of us mentioned was cross-training within each discipline. I'll use engineering, for example. In engineering, we review all sorts of things, but grading, stormwater infrastructure, compliance with our MPDS permit, and then there's our water connections and infrastructure and sewer connections and infrastructure, roads and streets, and all the things that go along with that. We also assist in the critical areas review with all the geocritical hazard areas, the steep slopes, your landslides, your erosions, hazard areas. Oh, there's a few other ones that are escaping me right now. And then we also are helping with our new CARA, the Critical Aquifer Recharge Area review. So we need to, have kind of a broad general knowledge of all the different more expertise in engineering. And so we have some experts in those various different fields of engineering. So we're starting to do cross-training to make our staff more robust so fewer reviewers have to look at each permit. So that will help in several different ways by making it more efficient so not as many people have to review, and then increasing our robustness, I guess is a good way to put it, if we have people who are out on leave or have to be gone for certain. We're also, as was previously discussed, kind of trying to streamline that coordination between the submittal platform of mybuildingpermit.com and the platform we use for tracking and reviewing permits. Track it. There's some improvements that we can probably make to that, but staff is monitoring that, updating it as they can, and that's just an ongoing thing that we're working on. We're also working on streamlining purchase orders and invoicing for peer reviews. We found that process was time intensive administratively, and so we were trying to reduce the steps and automate some of the processes. We're continuing to collect and monitor data using those enhanced metrics, come up with some reporting and communication tools. And then we are in progress and planned for the foreseeable future, routinely communicating those metrics with our review team and then getting feedback and adjusting when necessary, going through that cycle all over. So those are what we have going, and I think I'll pause here in case there's any questions or if anyone has suggestions for my other question mark bullet point there.
Thank you. We'll save the suggestions for later. Councilmember Joe?
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and the clarification into the dark world of engineering, so to speak, because all of it's underground, not because it's, okay, got it. Couple of questions. So I've been working with a utility district in Snohomish County, not anywhere near Issaquah. And one of the challenges that we're seeing is that they won't respond to a request for a face-to-face meeting. And can you just kind of go through what you have to have on your side before you're willing to do a face-to-face meeting? Obviously, you wouldn't meet with someone if you don't have the plans or you don't have certain elements. But if you could just go through that a little bit so that we on the council are reassured that there's a process for that.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a defined process, but typically it happens as, we become aware that the applicant would like to meet with us to discuss some things. And typically we try to resolve the problem without meeting if we can, because that seems to be more efficient. But when we do meet, we want to make sure we have enough information to take a look at so we can provide helpful information. But usually you schedule it through one of the reviewers or one of the managers, and then we set up a time and get together and go through the questions. Sometimes it's very helpful, and sometimes you spin your wheels, so you never know which one it's going to be. But the important thing is that we are responding to the applicant and providing information, and not making them feel like we don't want to meet with them, because that's the furthest thing from the truth. We really want to get all these issues out on the table and resolved. And usually with technical things like engineering, everyone can put their heads together and come up with probably a better solution than anyone alone. Yeah,
that's certainly been my experience working with another utility that seems to be more customer facing. The other question I had was, you indicated that people go on vacations and people might be out or overwhelmed just by the volume of the ebb and flow and volume of the projects. We were having problems with email responses, not getting anything back from this particular utility for 3 months or 6 months at all, and staffing challenges were cited, et cetera, et cetera. Is your email system or department system set up such that if a person is sending an email, it's going to multiple people so that people can respond and we don't have a black hole in terms of information that you just referenced, you try to avoid at all costs?
Well, we have various emails, and maybe some of you can help a little bit, but we typically the review team gets the email because that's who the applicant is familiar with. But if there's a generic email, we have PD engineers, PD planners in email. Maybe some others maybe can probably help with that.
If someone just has a question, then most likely they'll go to the city's webpage, they'll look up. So if they have a specific question, they can look at the directory and go there. But on the permitting webpage, they can contact our main person in the permit center, usually as Katie, who's not here, by phone. or they'll send an email to our permit techs, or they'll say CPD external, which goes out to 3 different people, and then it gets funneled to the right people. In there, you can schedule an appointment with a planner, with an engineer. We call it an acuity appointment, so they can just schedule it online as a appointment. But we provide, since our permit center is open, they can call the phone number, and we have one engineer, one planner, someone from building division there all the time during our open hours, so they can talk to a live person that way, and they'll get assistance. So multiple ways: email, phone, or appointments.
That's really great to hear, and I hope our citizens appreciate that we're a little lucky to have such robust staffing on hand. Since you're up there, I wanted to go back to your permit review slide where you're talking about the factors impacting review times. One of the things you put in there is that there was time involved with code update and implementation of Title 18. First, I want to thank my colleagues, President Walsh and Councilmember Hunt, for the great work they did and the outstanding guidance that you gave through that process. Just so the citizens know what kind of benefit to this planning process occurred because of the revamp of Title 18, could you give a couple examples of how we're saving time or we're saving money through the development process through the improvements made in Title 18?
Sure. We have, it was a complex code. So if you triggered a community meeting, for instance, there were 3 different types of community meeting. One that had to be hosted by the Development Commission, another one by staff. A project would trigger both, and staff would spend the time figuring out how to choreograph this whole thing with multiple hats being done, and how do we take this application in, and now we just call it one type of an application. So that in itself saves 10 meetings on the staff's end to kind of figure out how to do it. It tells the applicant how best to do it. Some other streamlining that happened was, some of those thresholds for short plat are 9-lot short plat, so you don't have to do that. A final plat, state law was changed. Now it doesn't require a hearing because the final plat is just checking all the technical stuff. The preliminary plat is when you do the hearing. So that went from a hearing process to an administrative final plat approval. So all of those things help the development community as well.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you for giving a couple of examples. Sometimes we pass laws and the citizens out there don't understand the impact that's going to have on the process. A final question for you. Buried in one of the reports, I can't cite the page, was a short paragraph on SEPA exemptions for certain infill projects. Is that going to be something that will be on the work plan for your department in the future, or is it something that will not be taken up as part of the work currently being done?
We did raise some of our flexible thresholds with the last Title 18 update. So, we didn't go all the way to 60 dwelling units without SEPA, but, the Central Issaquah has a planned action SEPA. So the city had done all that work where that is done up front by the city, so new projects that come in, if they're within that planned action, can be streamlined. So I think we're set up pretty good as we stand today.
Okay, great. And just so the public knows, we're exempting SEPA, but the process that's going on has already been duplicated at either the county or state level already, and we're not necessarily adding any value by doing SEPA review again. Is that your general assessment?
What we've done, the city has spent, the planned action was a city local effort that looked at the whole area as opposed to project by project. For Central Issaquah, we looked at the whole area and did a planned action. The state law allows that. We raised some of those levels because we weren't getting anything out of SEPA reviews. They just became additional reviews. So that was the last update that we did.
Okay, so we had already done the review and it would have been redundant to do
Correct.
it again. And so we did the SEPA exemption, just so our friends out there in the audience are not worried that we're hiding the ball, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. This might be a question for our city administrator. Following up on Councilmember Joe's comments about the state passing the legislation, I'm wondering about the larger context that we're working in here, because I have heard since I moved to Issaquah 35 or more years ago, that the permit process needed to be speeded up. And so I'm very excited about this presentation tonight, but I'm also wondering why the state felt that they needed to step into what has been a local process. I'm wondering if the context that we're in here is that this is part of the push to provide more affordable housing or an easier ability for construction in communities. Why did the state think that 5290 was required? I guess is the question I'm asking. And what's the bigger context that we're working in here?
Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, good evening. I think there's probably multiple reasons for it. I think the affordable housing piece certainly was a driver. I think there's perception and reality in all communities about planning processes, permitting processes. I've never worked at a place that wasn't the very worst place to get a permit in the history of mankind. So maybe that's me, and I apologize up front. But I think there's frustration, and I think the legislature heard that. I think the bill that was passed was largely driven by affordable housing concerns, but there's all these other factors that come into play too. I think at the end of the day, we've got to balance resources, as you've heard this evening. Our planners, our building officials, our engineers are not sitting in a cubicle waiting for a plan, and that's all how they spend their time. There's multiple facets to their job, and Issaquah is no different than other communities in that. So, that's my sense of things. Minnie, I don't know if you have any additional
I mean, the
thoughts.
state, I think it was Senator Millett who sponsored this particular bill. There was a lot of testimony from the development community and a desire to see standardization across cities, having some accountability for the permit process. So I think in that spirit, this bill kind of urges, but there were some penalties put into place. Now, the reality of the implementation, I think time will tell. Some of the local jurisdictions, I think at the planning directors meeting, some cities where we have a different filter. We were already on this path to kind of figure out the process improvements and all that. Some other smaller cities that are resource strapped are going to struggle. What does this mean for them? So I think, yeah, there was affordable housing. I mean, the ease of getting a permit was part of the discussion and testimony during the legislature session, but not the only point, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Deputy Council President Hall?
Yeah, you got me curious, so I was looking at ledge.wa.gov and trying to figure out rationale too. Dr. Dhaliwal, you or if Emily wants to come back up, I'm just curious what projects require peer review consultants.
Sure. So for the planning team manages the wetland peer review, where are the boundaries? Is it a type 1 wetland or not? Where the ordinary high water mark for the stream so that we can measure 200 feet for the shoreline. So those kind of things are handled by our planning team. Engineering team focuses on geotechnical, landslide and what type of soils and things like that. That is somewhat of an overlap with the building division, but building division's really looking at the size of the foundations for the type of soils. Is that the right? So geotechnical straddles both of those, but a different scope between them. The other peer reviews we have are, lighting sometimes gets technical, and those lighting levels need to be measured and things of that nature. Those are some of the common ones. Building does some structural review, so larger buildings, we have to do structural calculations and things like that. And then some of the larger buildings. So these peer reviews are passed through. So in our fee schedule, we have, if we don't have the expertise, we will, look at your technical report and pass that through. Sometimes traffic, if it's a complicated project that we need to have traffic report peer reviewed, but we have concurrency ordinance, so it doesn't happen in a lot of projects, but occasionally larger projects like that are passed through. But then we get some really big project that staff is swamped with other things, and it doesn't make sense for us to staff up for those occasional larger projects. Those we send out for consultant reviews. occasionally, but those, the city absorbs the cost for those peer reviews because it's, you know, we can't double charge them for the fee.
Okay, I think we're ready for the last few slides.
So I think the next steps we've shared what we are planning to do, things we've already done, and we can come back in March to show what progress has been made. And if target timelines are being met, we hope by then Department of Commerce would have their guidance out as well, which they said by the end of the year. Next slide. So we have some, emails here. Feel free to reach out to the subject matter experts. But what my team has told me, and I truly believe that if they get the direct question, they'll make sure the management team here that the answer gets delivered. If the staff gets the question through the email, they have the responsibility of getting back to them people. So I think the best way is to reach out to anyone in CPD, and they'll make sure the question's answered. I have my contact information. If anyone wants to talk to me about anything, I'm happy to chat with them. Next slide. So in our memo, we had some recommendations, which were primarily based on our data dive. We would like to start tracking time. We will be required to start tracking time, but we also want to start tracking time of total in-house time from the time anyone submits to when they get the permit. How many rounds of review there are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, however many. Instead of just this one slice of first round of review. We can continue to monitor that, but I think the complete picture is also needed. For land use applications, we want to track time not just for short plats and preliminary plats because those numbers are really low. We don't get a ton of them. Instead, we would track time for level 1, 2, and then all the other ones that require a public hearing, 3, 4, 5. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we do a customer survey. We push it out annually to the people that applied for a permit application. We get their email from our database. And we've had to date about 46 people that took the time to give us input. And I read through each one of them, and there's really some good information because it's from their experience. And, our staff deserves recognition. There are 4 staff named in those surveys saying so-and-so went out of their way to help me. I mean, that says a lot in terms of customer service that our staff provides. But then there is some constructive feedback. I couldn't find this on your website, and this is buried deep, or, it can be a very specific thing. So we'll continue to do that. And then all the improvements that we've kind of mentioned with you, the model that we want to establish of a continuous, the success is going to depend on our staff. I mean, they're the folks that are doing this, that have the dashboard that shows their reviews. So our success in all of this depends on our staff. We want to make sure we give our staff all the tools, the training, and they feel empowered to answer questions, whatever it takes. So we're committed to making it a better process. With that, we have some directions needed as some prompts for questions. We want to make sure we understand your priorities and goals, what you think is missing, and what we should measure. So with that, I think that's all for our presentation.
Okay, I'm going to ask council members if we have any other questions, then we'll go to any public comments. Any general questions, Councilmember Hunt?
On the goals for City Council, I do believe we have talked about cost recovery before. What data are you collecting on cost recovery, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, it's difficult for us. I mean, that happens through the budget process. So we look at our the way community planning and development budget is set up. There are 2 tracks. One is the permitting track. So all the staff that's involved in permitting, their salaries, wages, and all of that comes under that. All the consultant costs that are non-passed through are in that category. And then I think the target that council had set up previously was 80% cost recovery. So then we look at our fees and number of permits that we get. The issue usually is that, you can't control that from year to year. Sometimes these things straddle. A permit may come in this year, but the inspections go on for next 2 years. So we still have to fund those staff to do those inspections over that time period. So there isn't a good answer to that, but I think through the budget process, we look at where do we stand. And then, a big project comes along, and so the revenues are kind of off the charts, and but then we look at our day-to-day bread and butter kind of permits that are happening. So there's not a perfect way, but it happens during the budget process that we look at those numbers.
Deputy Council President Hall?
A couple lingering questions, sorry. When, I think, so Sandplat and Eastside Fire and Rescue were mentioned as like other agencies that sometimes people are getting permits through. Does that pass through us? Are we just notifying them that they need to receive a permit from another agency, or how does that work?
Yeah, Sandplat, they get the permits, they issue their own permits. Fire department does the review of all of our applications. So they have access to our permitting system. They have their own review line. They add their own reviews. So they act like our staff, but we don't have control over their review. But they collaborate pretty closely with James.
Okay, so yeah, EFR is actively a part of our process. You said
Correct.
Sandplat's different. They're
Do we
outside.
give the Sandplat a review line? Okay, so they do have access to a permit system then.
Oh, okay.
But they also issue their own permits when they have to, right? Yeah, so.
Okay. I'm just
but-
curious if the time it takes for those permits or that review to be issued is considered in our timeline for issuing and reviewing permits.
If it's a separate permit, they're going to Sandplat and getting no. But if they get a review line item, then yes, our report tracks, when all the reviewers are done, then the permit techs track all of those comments and send them out to the applicant.
And then just general knowledge, is there like a Washington permitting association or sort of statewide association that does any work in this area with regard to best practice or working with local jurisdictions?
Master Builder Association, sometimes, we collaborate with them on a few things, but as part of this state bill that got passed, there is a group formed by Department of Commerce of people involved in the local cities with permitting. So I forget what they call, but there are about 20 people on that group that are going to provide input to Commerce on this whole guidance.
And I'll also mention the APA, the Association Planning. Yeah.
American Planning Association, yeah.
Okay, looking over my questions, let's see. So we have a set target number of days for first permit review. How or do we track that on an individual application? Do people, as they're going through the process, understand how many days have gone by and how many days they're allotted? And further, do we change anything if we come close to that target?
Good question. So the system is in place where our tracking system, is set up where each reviewer has their own dashboard. And if they are past due, it turns red. And so in there, they get a line item that says due date on this date. So it's each reviewer can manage their own dashboard and know what things are due and so on and so forth. We are working on this report that the management team looks at. We have done it different ways where we call it a red list and we kind of send it out to everyone and saying, these are all overdue. But, what we found in that is some of that data was really, not hadn't been updated in the past or something. So there's some data cleanup going on for projects from the past. However, I think our goal is that we run these reports now. We have, with Keith Toomey's help, established some of these reports that we intend to, distribute widely among our staff and with administration and others that may be interested in, and really proactively looking at, not reacting afterwards, but what else is in the hopper. And so that's where the leadership team comes along, and they know their staff and balancing the workload among staff, if someone's going to be out and things of that nature is also part of that equation. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is each individual has a period of time for each of their tasks that's assigned and they're flagged when it's overdue. But looking at an entire project from payment to first review, there isn't like a clock that's sitting on it or anything that we would do to change our actions if we were coming toward that clock.
Correct. There's not a clock in technology that says so many days left. Yeah, that doesn't exist at this moment.
Okay, that sounds like that's going to be hard to adjust for SB 5290 because if there is a hard clock and we have to refund, having everybody playing toward that timeline is going to be important. Okay, let's see. How did we come up with our target timeline for first permit review?
I think that was an exercise many years ago that was done. There's no, here's a number. I think they just sat around the table and kind of looked at how, and asked people around what is the right time. So there isn't any based, it's not my understanding that is what it is. I think my personal opinion now is that we need to have that conversation again with our staff. And I'm not a big proponent if you push it further out that we're going to suddenly start meeting our targets. We don't want to have a moving target either, because every time, unless we get a volume that's way off the roof, and we need to make an adjustment based on that. But every time we'll spend more time kind of adjusting our targets. But can those be, do those need to be increased? The volumes don't tell me that that's the case. The review time of 10 weeks, I think our staff just told us, it's not the actual time it takes them to review that. It's the time it sits in the queue to get to it. So it's not the review time, active review time, it's the entire review time. So it's complex that way, but whether 10 weeks is the right time is a conversation to be had.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to go to public comment. So again, if somebody's on the phone, this is a time for comment, so you can press *3 and let the host know. If you're online, you're looking for the raise hand icon, or you can send the host a chat message. And I will again note there is nobody but all of our wonderful staff here who's going to make public comments. So clerk, do we have anyone online indicating desire to speak?
No.
Okay, fantastic. So now comes the feedback and review section. So I will note there were kind of 3 sections of feedback requested, which are up there. So do the following goals capture the council's goals and priorities for the permit process improvements? Are there any ideas missing for the list of planned improvements, or are there any that we should prioritize over others? And what else should we be measuring as an indicator of success? Councilmember Martz, starting us off.
So this is interesting. Measuring organizational velocity, to me, I don't want to say it's not important what you specifically measure, but what is absolutely critical is that you get both relative velocity and absolute velocity. And what I mean by this is relative velocity is over time. We have been measuring the performance of our permitting office for a very long time, and it would be nice to look at some pre-COVID metrics, pick some metrics that would allow us to see the velocity of the organization over time and how we're doing. I recognize COVID represents discontinuity in organizational performance, and so you can't look at during that time, but this is a problem that has bedeviled us for a very long time. So that relative velocity, and of course going forward, I have no doubt that whatever metric we come up with now, we'll look at going forward. The second part of this is absolute velocity, and metrics are almost not worth doing if we can't compare them to cities like Redmond, Kirkland, Bothell, Renton, Kent, the cities that have comparable complexity, comparable land use policy issues. I want metrics that allow us to look at both relative velocity and absolute velocity. And within that context, it does matter that we look at things that are important. You know, I like the efficiency, clarity, consistency. Those are all important. But to me, picking things that we can look at both the relative and the absolute velocity over time will allow us to understand how we're doing and talk to the community about the performance of our organization. Thank you.
Starting us off strong. Councilmember Ray.
I just want to build on my friend, Councilmember Martz. So timeliness is a little bit vague, but I do like what you threw out there about kind of looking at total process time, and I think that goes to the velocity question that Councilmember Martz was really going to. So submission to issuance is really important, and then broken down by the 1s and 2s, 3, 4s, and 5s. So that we're looking at the different flavors. And I think we've got some good targets based on state law, because that's our floor. I don't think that's our ceiling, not our floor. We can go below that, and I think we should challenge ourselves to beat those numbers. So that's the first thinking. I found the quality, effectiveness, clarity, and consistency a little vague. So I'd like to see some more specificity around exactly what we are talking about when we talk about, you know, how are we going to measure efficiency, clarity, or consistency? Because that is a little bit challenging for me to wrap my head around. Cost recovery is great. I know that's going to be a challenge to do, but I think we need to do that. There was one thing in the deck that I loved, which was your quality wheel. And I liked the fact that it was identify the problem, do the root cause analysis, what are the countermeasures, what are the, how are we going to measure success, you know, wash, rinse, repeat. And what I was looking for in the presentation, didn't see a whole lot of it, was that root cause analysis. So I think as we start going down this road, more focus on what are the root causes, and then we can start to put in those intermediate measures of how are we measuring our success on those root causes. And then just in closing, when I put my process improvement hat on, there's several forms of real classic waste, and 2 of them are defects and waiting. And those are 2 I think we should focus on. Waiting is whenever somebody is waiting in a queue for a backlog because I don't have someone to review the permit, or I'm waiting because I haven't heard back from Sam Platt, or I'm waiting because the whomever hasn't paid their bill yet. We need to look at what's causing us to go into a wait state, because there is huge amounts of waste in that. And then defects, I think we talked a little bit about how many of our applications get sent back multiple times, and I would like to see some come in and get processed without going back. So whatever we can do to crawl upstream so we don't have defects, and then really track and drive down the number of defects and returns of applications we have. Thanks.
2 strong starts there. I'm going to appreciate that. Who wants to go next? Councilmember Hunt.
I do think that these goals capture City Council's previous discussions on this topic. I think we have talked about timeliness, quality, efficiency, and clarity, and cost recovery. I think it's important, as Councilmember Martz spoke to, that we want to be able to compare, and we want to be able to be on an equal playing field with our neighboring cities. And so to understand how we compare to our neighboring cities, we would need that data. And I think that's very important. And it's a nuance, but our goals are, I think, an important part of that goal is to be comparable to our neighboring cities in terms of all 3 of these: timeliness, quality, and cost recovery. These are goals that we have had for a long time. And so cost recovery in particular, I would really like to get a handle on how we're doing on that. I think that from the data that's been provided, because the time to issuance is longer than our target in some cases, and that I imagine is the main thing driving cost recovery, more staff time for those permits. So I think that our cost recovery is probably also not at our target, but I don't have that data to say that. So I think this is a goal, and if we need to adjust how we're measuring it so that we can get a handle on this, that would be, maybe that's something we should consider. Cost recovery per project, for example, or cost recovery on a rolling average basis, because you mentioned one of the main issues with cost recovery is projects that go from one year into the next. So if you did a rolling average of the projects over the year or something like that. I think that on timeliness, I am concerned about this requirement for the 120 days because of the statistics that were reported. The average processing, or the table on page 6, where it has complete and issued after 60 days. There are 8 that were later than that, and that was out of 41, so that's about 20%, so about 1 in 5. So I think this is a goal that we have to be timely. I think measuring against the current state requirement is a good way to track that, and I think we need to meet that requirement. And then, of course, the upcoming requirements, which will mean that we have to pay back the money to the state, not to the state, to the applicant. So that's, I think, that having the timeliness measured in terms of the same standards that are set forth in the current state law as well as the upcoming state law, I think will help us prepare for that state law and also help us best understand if we're going to be able to meet those targets. And then I think for quality, efficiency, and clarity, consistency, you mentioned that there were some great feedback from applicants, which is excellent. There is a slight downtick between 2021 and 2022. And again, I think having pre-pandemic for quality, pre-pandemic for those customer satisfaction and quality type metrics would be helpful to look at that longer term trend. But it did look like there was a slight downtick, so that would also be something to watch. So I think our goals are the goals that the City Council has put forward, with the exception that I do think we really need to have that comparison statistic, and that will help us orient. Thanks.
Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you all for being here and for the work that you do day in and day out. Also, you said some inspectors, other administrative staff weren't able to be here, so please share council's thanks with them as well. I don't disagree with anything that's been said so far. With regard to the first point, I agree, this is good. I also think the ordering is good. You know, we want to ensure quality, we want to ensure safety, compliance, all the things you guys were talking about, but you know, also ensuring quickness is important because we want builders to build here and not there, or at least be comparable, as was said, right? And that's going to be hugely important to ensuring that we're realizing the central Issaquah plan and other kind of strategic planning documents, the new state requirements, of course. I think the only thing, and I just harp on this all the time with all policies and programs, but the only thing that might be missing in terms of a goal for me is innovation. You know, like where are the ways that we can be adaptive as a team, and team identifies, you know, bottlenecks, potential areas for exploring new ideas to try new things that might be able to innovate the field. I just love, you know, being able to experiment where we can. So if we can just kind of think outside the box in the areas that we feel comfortable doing that, we should be embracing that. And I think that should be either a goal or captured somehow in one of these other. Also really liked what Councilmember Ray said. You said crawl upstream, which I think is a great way of thinking about it, especially post salmon days. But you know, we heard it's normal to see correction letters, very normal to see correction letters. So you know, what are the ways? How can we identify opportunities to educate and prevent those correction letters from being needed in the first place? Are there external groups that we could be working with or sharing those kind of FAQs that Emily was talking about? Or is there kind of really accessible information we can be sharing with HOAs to make sure that they're sharing that with, because oftentimes HOAs are the very first contact for someone who might be wanting to make a tenant improvement in their home. So yeah, those are the points I really wanted to hammer home, and innovation. And thank you again.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. In terms of the first bullet point, I think that using the triangle to kind of hone in on the timeliness, quality, efficiency, clarity, consistency, and cost recovery, and focused on the center of that triangle is helpful as we go forward. I think that looking at the diversity of housing report, which is in the next item, I would urge my colleagues to look at Appendix F, which is a summary of developer meetings that Eco Northwest conducted with several different groups. And there, going and building on the point of Zach Hall, it talks about having increasing flexibility of zoning regulations, which could allow developers to respond to changing market conditions more easily and to ensure housing units are delivered. Turning that on its head, staff, as they look at the regulations and the zoning that's there, if they see things that are blocking or causing a problem, please come to us with the innovations that you think would be helpful. For example, in the Title 18 project, we decided to eliminate one of the reviews that council was responsible for, as we didn't see too much utility in the closed hearing review in one section, and we still were able to adhere to state law, make sure that the applicant had an opportunity to be heard all the way through, but it was a less expensive way to do that hearing along the way, and probably consolidated that process a little bit for the applicant as well. The other thing that just in the administrative barriers section of this Appendix F, I'll just point out that these are things that certainly you hear all the time from the development point of view, that streamlined design requirements could save significant time and money. In addition, speeding up permitting for small projects could help eliminate bottlenecks for larger, more intensive projects. And I think we heard some of that tonight in terms of taking some that are in the queue that can easily be taken care of with a quick couple of checks and then on to the next one is one example of the work that the planning department is doing and the public works are doing to make sure that happens. So I appreciate that. Anything we can do to streamline design requirements to save time and money on both sides of that equation, I think would be helpful. And then finally, the people that responded to this Appendix F also cited that it can, and I'll underline can, be difficult to get time with city staff to advance designs and proposals. And I think we touched on that with Emily a little bit in terms of when the applicant is asking for a meeting. It seems that it's fairly easy to get a meeting if all of the groundwork has been done and the plans are there so that there is something substantive to talk about. So I appreciate that from the department as well and the city as we go forward. In terms of measuring success as the last point, I think that we have a community that wants to build more housing and a community that needs more housing here, just to kind of bleed over to the next element a little bit. But and there seem to be some challenges that are on the council side, some challenges on the administrative side that need to be kind of worked through. But I would like to see as a measure of success, in my mind, that we are building housing that is affordable along all incomes of the spectrum. And at the same time, we are still planning Issaquah for the future so that my children can come back here and live here. My elderly dad can perhaps live in an ADU way in the backyard far away from me. And we're able to make sure that people can age in place in their communities. Thank you.
Councilmember DiMichele.
So I want to make clear before I get into my comments that I am absolutely pro-efficiency, pro-effectiveness. I think it's a great thing that we've undertaken here, and I do appreciate all the work that the staff has done. I will just express some concerns because Minnie talked about things that are out of anyone's control. They may be out of the control of the people on our staff. They may be out of the control of the applicant. I'm just thinking about the day that we miss a deadline and have to return the applicant fees. So I guess the one issue that I would like to raise is that we keep a really good eye on the number of people that we need on staff, and if we have staffing that is up to making the measurements that we set as our goals and as the state is now setting for our goals, and that we be realistic about it. I support everything that's been said here, but we have real people working in a department under highly pressured environment, and I want to make sure that we are making, that we are ensuring that it's a good workplace and that the goals that we're setting are realistic and meetable. So I guess the thing that I would like us to watch out for is, do we have enough people to do the task and reach the goals that we've set for ourselves? And if we don't, we need to come back during the budget process and take a look at that. So that's my concern. I will also mention that my sister, my dear sister, has been a planner for over 20 years, and I've heard some of the things that can happen during the planning process, and things can go sideways without anybody being at fault for them going sideways. So I'm very interested in the fact that now we will have to return fees when it could be a reason that nobody's at fault, but all of a sudden we're doing the work for free. So we'll see how this works out. We'll see how it goes. So those are my comments. Yeah, that's it.
That leaves me. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack here. I think we're asking the wrong questions. I think what you have presented here doesn't give us a lot of opportunities to change. You've presented what you're planning to do, and the problem is we're not only facing an urgent situation, but we're also facing a threat to our reputation as a city. I think everybody understands that we've long been known as a really difficult place to do business. And then you combine that with our current housing crisis and the idea that one of the major suggestions of how to bring housing costs down has been to streamline permit timelines. And so then I want to take a step back and get into more of the why of this process. So with the Title 18 goals and outcomes chart, we established the umbrella goals, which included reforming regulations for more improved efficiency, equity, consistency, and predictability, as well as make the code easier to understand and better organized for use by the public, property owners, and staff. If we haven't accomplished that, then we need to know about that, and we need to figure out what changes need to be made. If it's just, this is a new document and we need to get all of the processes and documentation on how to use that, I'm okay with that, but I need to know that as the answer. And then, so kind of having established the why. We've got a housing crisis. We've been known as a bad place to do business. We already said this was a goal from Title 18. My next concept is, okay, so how do we go about doing that? And that's where I come into the problem with these questions. There isn't really a recommendations and options section of this staff memo other than, do you agree with our list of projects? And so when I look at the urgency of this situation, and then also that time, cost, scope, priority triangle, it doesn't give me anything that says, okay, if I think this is an urgent problem and I want to give you guys 3 more staff members to deal with it, if you've identified that's your blocking point, none of that is really presented to me as something that I can take action on. So you asked, are there any ideas missing for the list of planned improvements, or are there any that we should prioritize over others? And I have to push back on that and say, you tell me. Because what wasn't highlighted really here was, what are your biggest barriers? You know, you've presented some things that you're planning to do, and I think they're all good, but I don't know which one of those is going to move the needle. And I don't then know which one to tell you to prioritize. So, and I'll do a little bit of kind of reflecting back. When we got a presentation from Director Moon, when she came in and talked about, here's the things that I've identified as happening with Public Works, and came in and said, hey, we're facing these barriers. If we don't make a change to our staffing, which was what she identified as her barrier, these will be the impacts. And so I'm not really seeing that level of potential action here that is something that we could do anything about. So when I'm talking about what your biggest barriers or the biggest things that we could do, one of the questions I would ask is there something that we can remove from your plate? I reflect back on the concept of, you know, fire departments used to do, or police used to do more, and like having to scale back and figure out, okay, what's your core component, or what are you doing that maybe we need to either dedicate different resources to. So if I'm thinking about those types of things, it's like, okay, if you have developers who keep coming to you and have a common list of problems, you know, do we have an FAQ on the website that addresses those? Are they updated? Do we have pre-written responses for those common problems? Is the initial tech check not effective at catching all of those things? And maybe that's why we're coming through multiple reviews. You know, what are the reasons for those rounds of corrections? Do we need somebody to come in out externally to audit the system? Do we need a new technology that allows you to understand what those are? Is the problem we're having a lot of things passed back and forth, and so maybe we need a stand-up meeting every day where people come in and say, I'm waiting on you for this, I'm waiting on you? Or is it cross-departmental? Do we need to do leadership meetings? So I'm just throwing out a lot of those possibilities because I don't know how to respond to you guys and say, yes, you're doing the right things, and I can see how that's going to move the needle and all of that. And particularly now when we're looking at the SB 5290, my big concern there is the huge liability that that puts us in as a city. Because I think we can look at even if we don't have the best metrics in the world right now, I think we can pretty confidently say we're not meeting those timelines. And so I don't understand what we're going to do between now and the beginning of 2025 that's going to make a difference on that. So I'm here going, I wish I could tell you that this is going to move the needle and we're going to be fine by 2025, but you haven't given me the information that says, you know what your biggest barriers are, you know what you need to address those barriers, and we're on a pathway that we're going to not have that risk and liability hanging over our head as of 2025. So then the last thing I'll say is I agree that our timeline or our metrics need to be absolutely tied into what other cities. I don't know if they currently are, but when I did a quick Google search on what the other cities have as their targets and the times that they're hitting, Kirkland says for a single family unit, their time to first review, their target is 17 days. And their actual is 23 days. Again, they might just be all of their internal time and we might be measuring total time. I don't know. But when I'm looking at that, that becomes one of the questions I have to ask is, are we that far behind another city? And thus, are developers going there and not here to give us the affordable housing or even just the housing supply that we need? And so I still have a bunch of questions. Okay, I wrote out a lot. I have a lot to say here. Any other comments as we've heard what everybody else has to say? Councilmember Hunt.
I agree with Council President Walsh on the second question. I had a similar answer to the second question. And I also think that a lot of these do sound great, like streamline, the word streamline is used in a bunch of places, which would be great. But then my question would be, why are those not what we're doing? And if they're already what we're doing, then is that going to get us to a place where we can meet these targets? And so I had similar concerns and a similar thoughts about that second question. I think it would be good to know if there's a plan for doing things. Right now, we know that we aren't meeting a lot of our targets. For growth and development, we have a number of targets that were set out in the strategic plan. We have, of those, 2 targets met, 9 missed, and 1 goal that didn't have a target. And that one is about renter versus homeownership percentage, so it shouldn't have a target. But that means we've met 2 targets and missed 9, and then, similarly, we've seen some other data about missing the timelines. So I do think my question would be, what's the plan for meeting those targets, and why are we not? What do we need to change? So this seems like a list of things that that sound great, but I'm not sure which of them will get us to meeting our targets, and if we as a council need to take action, we would like to know that in terms of budget or other things. That was my response to the second question.
Deputy Council President Hall.
I also wonder if there's anything that we need to be considering. It's probably too late ahead of the 2024 session, but if there's anything we need to consider adding to our legislative agenda, or are there any types of things that we need to be talking with state leaders about when it comes to permitting or land, or just general land use or building or anything like that? So I don't know, maybe that could be something you chew on as well. And as the 2025 session comes along, or even if we're able to, think of things for the next session, I'm sure that there is a lot of talk about this, especially if there was a permitting bill just last session. I'm sure there might be a cleanup bill. There usually always is with bills like these. So just trying to be mindful of kind of where are the areas that we could potentially talk with our legislators about our priorities here in Issaquah and how permitting is taking shape.
Councilmember Ray.
Thanks. I just want to close for me with, I'm not going to tell you guys how to do your job. You're far, far better at that than I will ever be or ever pretend to be. But I think the request is, if there are resources you need, either people or consulting or training or whatever that be, I mean, that's, I think, the one thing where we would like to be able to understand the need so we can factor that in. And then I think it is up to you to figure out how the heck to get us to a place where, because I really responding to Councilmember DiMichele a little bit, kind of viscerally, which is, there are things out of our control. Well, that's life, and that's everywhere, and so you can't get away from that. So we've got to build in. We got to get so good that there's buffers, so when the bad stuff happens, it doesn't affect us. So this is a great opportunity for growth for everybody. And thanks for everything that you put together here, because this was some nice work.
Is that it? Okay. So, City Administrator, you want to?
Yes, Council President, thank you all for your comments. My only final thought is time frame to come back. We had originally said March. I'm concerned, based on the discussion this evening, that perhaps is not appropriate. I think we can continue to have budget discussions. We're in the midst of preparing what the mid-biennium budget adjustments will be. Excuse me. So we can continue to work on that, but perhaps earlier than March to come back with many things that have been discussed. So perhaps January, we could, with a committee of the whole, come back and at least give a status report. This is something I know that Mayor Pauly is very concerned about and will be a major theme for us in 24 working on this. So I think it would be appropriate to come back a little sooner than March.
I mean, I agree. Anybody have a problem with that? No? Okay, yeah, you're the staff component and figure out where everything works. But I would love to hear more about that and really, really truly understand what your barriers are, what we can do as resources to try and help address some of those, and then have confidence as a team that we can get to the metrics that we need to. There's some challenging metrics out there. So, okay. Do you have everything you need then to look at that timeline?
Sure. No, thank you for your feedback. It's always good to hear your perspective and for our staff to hear directly, have an opportunity to hear directly the council's vision. We will be back in January to continue the conversation and continue to look at where we need to be and where we are today. So, but I'm confident we'll get there, one way or the other. Thank you.
Okay. So I know we have staff that's probably going to move out, and we've been up here for 2 hours. So 10-minute break, 5-minute break, 7-minute break. Fantastic. And thank everybody for coming. We'll return at 8:37. Okay, and we are back for the second half of the meeting, and it is 8:37 p.m. for ID 1509, Policy Funding and Services on the Housing Continuum. And I think Jen Davis-Hayes, you are starting us out. Thanks.
Yes, good evening, council members. Thank you for having us here this evening. We are going to be as I can do these two things at once now on this computer. We're here tonight as a follow-up to our meeting in April, where we provided an update about our affordable housing efforts, everything from the policy and regulations to operations and capital funding opportunities. Tonight, you'll hear a quick update from Monica Negrilla. Oh my gosh. Negrilla. Gosh, why is that not coming out right? Regarding the House Bill 1590 funding investments. And in particular, you'll hear some updates and request input from Kristen Leeson about the next steps from the Housing Strategy 6 and 8, and a follow-up to the Housing Action Plan grant efforts. And then you'll hear from me talking about the Strategic Opportunity Fund and getting input on that process. So we are going to go to Monica first.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, council members. This is Monica Negrilla in Human Services. I will get us started off just with a brief update on the funds that were already allocated for 2023. I'm talking in particular about a 0.1% affordable sales tax revenues. And so with that, next slide, please. I'm just going to focus on a brief update on three projects, in particular the emergency housing program that started earlier this year, the emergency funding for rental assistance that you council allocated also earlier this year, and the behavioral health program. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide, same information. So what you see here on the screen is just a brief summary of the allocations for this year. On the left-hand side in blue, you see both capital and operation allocations for the emergency housing program, for the behavioral health program, and the rental assistance. And on the right-hand side, you see the year-to-date spending. So definitely starting at the bottom, we expanded, allocated, distributed the rental assistance program. We did not touch yet the behavioral health, new staffing allocations, and we are almost about halfway through the spending for the emergency housing program. I have to make a small note and apology. I updated this information last year, and I managed to update the information with the most recent numbers, in particular for the operational spending for the emergency housing program. But I managed to update the PowerPoint slide, but not the memo. And then I also forgot to add up the total. So apologies for that. We noted the mistakes, and we are working with Tisha to make sure that we correct that. So just a brief update that I'm going to move on to the next slide. I know we are in a hurry, and we are going to stop in a few minutes for any questions that you might have. So diving deeper into the emergency housing program updates, I'm very proud to say that we were able to launch the program in July. We brought staff on board in June. We have 11 participants active in services currently. Everyone is working on multiple goals, at least one goal, but multiple goals, most of them. As you may remember, council members, we use the wellness wheel. Everybody's working on at least one goal in multiple areas. As I mentioned, we are focusing on 8 goal areas: vocational, educational, financial, physical, social, environmental, spiritual, and emotional, as part of a larger goal of and vision of helping folks integrate back into the society. A lot of highlights and a lot of lessons learned in the first 2 months of the program. Probably the biggest highlights really are we successfully were able to place 2 people on the housing list. And actually, since last week, one of those people, actually today, moved into permanent housing. So that is definitely one of our biggest highlights, and very, very rewarding. Staff have worked amazingly with participants and with Plymouth Housing in Bellevue. Very, very grateful for their cooperation and collaboration. So huge highlight there. A few other highlights. We had 3 participants who obtained employment since the program started. Every day that the person continues to keep the job is an amazing day. We celebrate it every day. Then again, we have just some other highlights that include just access to mental health services or medical services, to SNAP benefits, all sorts of highlights. And as we also said, quite a few lessons learned from training not only participants, but training staff, to really working one-on-one with people. Folks come with all sorts of challenges, and it's not easy, but it's very, very rewarding, and we are very humbled by everybody's participation. So I'm gonna move us forward to the next slide to provide you a quick update on the rental assistance. As you may recall, $200,000 were allocated by you, City Council, and we distributed them to 3 nonprofit partners: Issaquah Community Services, St. Vincent de Paul, and the YWCA. Overall, we were able to support a little bit over 160 households, totaling over 500 residents. Really, what was unique about this, and we are grateful for your support, and this is also one of the reasons why we were able to distribute the money in a kind of like fast track fashion, was that we supported the agencies with making the least amount of changes to their programmatic structures. So each agency was able to deliver services in a way that made more sense for them, focusing on equity. Your request was to focus on serving families with school-age children and prioritize BIPOC families. We did that. Over 75% of those who were helped were coming from families with school-age children and BIPOC families. I'm gonna move us forward there again. And last quick update here on the behavioral health program. Just a brief recap. Earlier this year, City Council, you provided support and allocated funds to hire 2 additional behavioral health staff, 1 supervisor and 1 coordinator position, to create a team of 4 and be able to create a co-response model with the police department, while also maintaining our current model of focusing on long-term referral and case management. We are currently continuing to operate this program with 1 existing staff, and you may know, of course, Amir Shabana. He continues to do a fantastic job holding down the fort. You may recall in June, Kaylin moved to Boston, and so we are still looking to fill that position, while we are also in the process of hiring the other 2 positions. One candidate, the supervisory position, we are very, very hopeful that we are very, very close to being able to onboard that position. They are currently in backgrounding, but we are yet to fulfill the other 2 positions. To say that it's been challenging to hire, it's an understatement, but we are hopeful. We continue to work with our human resources department. We reposted the positions, and we are working and trying to come up with creative ways to hire. The biggest challenges are we are looking for licensed mental health professionals who have master's degrees and at least 2 years post-master's experience. And so there's a dire need in the community, in the field, in the region for those licensed professionals. So I think that's probably our biggest challenge. And with that, I'm gonna stop. This is just an informational update, so we don't really have specific questions for you. We just wanted to stop by part of the Housing Continuum follow-up to provide you an update. We are, of course, though, always open for questions, input, and feedback. Otherwise, we plan on continuing to learn lessons and update our programs and monitor community needs. And then we also plan to come back to you in 2024 with more updates and also recommendations for long-term programmatic needs.
Any questions for Monica before we move on to the next section? Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. On the, especially the newer programs, so the behavioral health program in particular, how are you getting the word out to the community about the existence of these programs and that they can use these resources?
For the behavioral health program?
Yes, and I think broadly the newer programs, how do you get the information out to the community so they know about these programs?
Thank you. So primarily we work with our community partners, with our nonprofit providers. And so also for the past two years, we've been building relationships with the community, especially with the homelessness community. So for the emergency housing program, that is a continuation of the work that we've been already doing. So then we have those relationships with the community members who need the services, but also with the nonprofits that are connected to, like the meals programs, the food bank. For the behavioral health program, all of our referrals come from the police department. So then we are in close connection with the police department who knows, and they are referring participants to us. Other than that, we haven't been promoting to the community necessarily the services, since they are more geared to the community members that we are already in touch with.
Okay, Deputy.
If I can just add, the direction we've received from you and from Mayor Pauly is to serve Issaquah first. And we only have so many resources. And because, quite honestly, we have our act together better than many of our neighbor communities, we want to make sure that we serve Issaquah first. So that's why we quite honestly don't bring a lot of publicity to this, because the times that there have been publicity, we get inundated with residents from other communities, and then that overwhelms resources that we have. So I think we're very mindful to work with the local Issaquah community partners, help local Issaquah community residents. We are not staff. We do not have the resources to solve the region's homeless problems. So we're very mindful of that.
Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. I have some follow-up questions on the behavioral health program, Monica, if that's okay. Oh, great. So you had talked about, hiring for these two other positions being difficult as an understatement. Is this a common theme still, though, across everyone who's hiring in this space, or is this specific to these kinds of positions? What's your sense of kind of the landscape for hiring behavioral health professionals in King County right now?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. My sense is that the need is high everywhere. Recently, I happened over notification from the Department of Health who created an emergency rule just to create a pool of licensed mental health supervisors to help the new generation of incoming licensed professionals, just because they're just not enough to even provide those licensing and supervisory requirements. So I think that the need is there everywhere I look. Everybody is hiring and they have a hard time filling these positions. In particular for us, these last two positions, we are looking for licensed mental health professionals and or substance use professionals with that independence crisis response interest and experience, ideally, which then makes it a little bit more challenging than just a typical licensed mental health professional who could be in an office or providing telehealth services. These are positions that we are asking people to go out in the field, potentially in dangerous situations with police. So that adds to the challenge. The other aspect that we realize that probably adds to the challenge is that since it's a master's level license requirement, in order to be able to provide services at an independent level without supervision, you need to also work for 2 years post your master's degree. And so by that time, after 2 years after your master's degree, people are also ready to move on into supervisory roles, and therefore often they might not be as interested or as willing to just do work in the field, if that makes sense. These are just more like observations, and I don't necessarily have like a rule, but these are just observations, as you said, that I have from the region and talking with other partners as well.
No, thank you. And I appreciate your read on kind of the landscape. And yeah, that makes perfect sense. Follow-up question of that. Do you happen to know if the Core Connect team at Eastside Fire and Rescue require the same kind of license? Or are they doing the same kind of thing in terms of being out, responding to situations by themselves in emergent situations? And so are they asking for the same kind of licensing requirement?
Similar and a little bit different. My understanding is that the Core Connect team focuses on social workers. However, independent licensed social workers have the same requirements with master's level and then also postgraduate supervisory degrees. So from that, again, just some similarities and some differences as well. And also my understanding is that, yes, the Core Connect team also has long-term plans in moving into the response model. And so they are also in a transition model with that as well. Yeah, they were able to do their hiring the last year or last couple of years when the crisis was not as big. And so hopefully they're holding on to their staffing models and their staffing.
Thank you, Monica. You can tell there's a lot of interest in this, and I think we are ready to go on to the next section. So, Kristen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Good evening, Kristen Leeson, Senior. Okay, I'm going to try this again. Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with Community Planning and Development, and I am going to talk about some policy and regulation tonight, specifically a quick update on the comprehensive plan housing element and how that's coming, and also the housing strategy work plan follow-up from the work that we've done earlier with the Happy Grant funds. So the second one is where we are going to need some direction from the City Council on, do you agree with moving forward with the development regulations analysis, and what are the priorities to pursue? And considering the time, we may need to come back and discuss that at some other time, but food for thought. So starting with the comprehensive plan periodic update, you may recall that with our comprehensive plan, there are several state and county policies and laws that we must comply with when writing our elements, and quite a few were added over the last few years, particularly for our comprehensive plan. The county requirements were big. One, I'm just going to go through them: reduce barriers to homeownership, a lot of it with affordable housing and homeownership, to at or below 80% area median income, prioritize need for households at or below 30% area median income, expand housing opportunities citywide, not just affordable, but this is where the diversity of housing new rules come in. allow for higher density and diverse housing in the regional growth center, prioritize the use of local and regional resources funding surplus property for income restricted housing. And you may recall we just had affordable housing targets that were adopted. Our housing targets in total are 3,500 for 2044, and our affordable housing targets are just over 3,100, with over half of those being at 50% and below the area median income. So the state was very, very busy enacting laws for housing this year, but really there's only one that will affect our comprehensive plan in a big way. That's the emergency and permanent supportive housing one, House Bill 1220. And what's in orange is what we don't have in our comp plan. So we need to accommodate and plan for moderate, low, very low, and what we did not have are extremely low income households. Accommodate and plan for emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing, adopt anti-displacement policies, and we already inventory and monitor. And there are corresponding code amendments that will come with this. Those will happen from mid-2024 through mid-2025. As for just a quick backing up for just a second, the housing element, the first draft has been through the Planning Policy Commission. It also went to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee, I believe, last week. We will work on amending doing a second draft based on all of those comments and public feedback, and then before it goes to its first review by the Puget Sound Regional Council in the state. Then moving on to the housing strategy work plan and implementation update. It's housing diversity, but it's also inclusionary zoning. And we received a grant in 2022 to implement strategies 6, 7, and 8. We then use that funding to hire Eco Northwest to do the analysis for us. And the staff summary and their final report, Eco Northwest final report, were included in your packet. They were also sent to you on September 1st of this year. So strategy 7, I'm going to ignore the screen. Strategy 7 is to mitigate deterrence to condominium development. And what we found is that there's not really anything that we can do in our code to change that. So work will continue through our legislative agenda with the state until something great happens. Strategy number 6 was to expand inclusionary zoning throughout Central Issaquah and potentially outside of Central Issaquah. And so we looked at this, and what we found is currently allowed, or it's currently required in our mixed-use Central Issaquah, urban core, and vertical mixed-use zones. And what they found is it's not working there. So before we can expand it, we have to fix any issues that might be there. And you saw in the report, very long, many, many, many things to consider and things that we need to analyze and calibrate, because it's not just fixing one or the other. It's like those old stereos where you change the bass and the treble until it just gets just right. So that's what we need to do. So one of those is to look at our inclusionary zoning requirements, which might be raising the area median income that's required or lowering the number of units that are required to be affordable in any residential development. Our development bonus program has kind of struck a chord. We have our structured parking requirements, which then takes the building higher, which then requires people to then automatically do our development bonus program, but they're also required to do inclusionary zoning. So, reevaluating development bonus, and do we change the requirement? Do we make it easier? So many things to talk about. The last one would be to implement a multifamily tax exemption program, which you all are already having many discussions about. But it's been found that when you do the MFTE along with inclusionary zoning, you tend to get a little bit more development. Lastly, I have structured parking requirements on here. Crossed it out because we're already going to do that. We have a parking study that's going to happen in 2024. It'll look at both structured and numbers of parking citywide. So strategy number 8 was to expand diversity of housing. And we looked just at multifamily zones, not single family, because we knew that was coming through state law. So we can do it, but we already made some changes to the code. You may recall we didn't even have definitions. So we adopted definitions for micro units, courtyard housing, and cottage housing, and we also allowed it as permitted uses. So it might happen, it could happen, it couldn't before, but it's more likely to happen if we re-look at these things. So one is consider incentivizing courtyard housing and multifamily high. Another is to reevaluate impervious coverage limits, specifically in the multifamily high zone, but that comes with looking at surface water, stormwater, many other studies that have been done as well. And then incentivize cottage housing in lower density zones than the multifamily medium and multifamily high, so looking at them where in single family zones. Again, they said to reevaluate, they suggested, and remember, their report's a starting point. It's not an ultimate, this is what you have to do. These are things that we need to look at. So another was to reevaluate the minimum parking requirements and then reevaluate all parking requirements for micro units, particularly the structured parking requirements. Now, I don't have a questions slide on here, but if you all have any, that's all I have.
Any questions for Kristen? Councilmember Hunt?
On the last slide for incentivizing the cottage housing, which is, there's two different incentivized recommendations from Eco Northwest. What would be has staff thought through, and what would be the specific ways we would incentivize that, speed up or like offer expedited permitting or?
We talked a little bit about it. One is the layout of the housing and how you design how it goes in there. Maybe driveway widths so that they can use less land, or sorry, they can put more on there if the driveway widths are a little bit smaller. Some of it was reducing parking or not requiring parking because a lot of them just park on the streets. There were different things that come up, but we haven't looked into it seriously, just ideas that were popping out.
Okay, thank you.
Kristen, why would we consider incentivizing courtyard housing in multifamily high?
Because people might not want to do it right now because they can build so much higher, but on the other hand, they can't build so much higher because of parking requirements and things. So if courtyard housing, it's really a policy thing. If courtyard housing is really what we want to see, and this is where we're looking at putting it, and people want to build higher because they can have more density, how are we going to incentivize somebody doing some courtyard? It's really more of a policy discussion. Do you want that courtyard feel? Do you want that diversity of housing, or do you want more density? So it's partly a policy discussion.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking in and it doesn't make sense from a land use value. It doesn't maximize the number of units per acre or anything. And I'm like, why would we use a multifamily high for something less than its highest and best use? So, okay, thanks. I think that has the questions there, so we're good on that.
Hi, Jen Davis Hayes, Economic Development Manager. I'm here tonight to talk about the Strategic Opportunity Fund and to get feedback about council's about the approach of this fund. So, as you may remember, the Strategic Opportunity Fund would be revenues from HB 1590 and House Bill 1406, which have criteria that you have to serve families, households of 60% AMI and lower. So therefore, we're looking at this subset of our housing continuum. This is a summary of the sources of funding that we currently have for affordable housing and some of that criteria and the anticipated revenues from 2021 to 2024. We are going to be talking about the first two, again, House Bill 1590 and House Bill 1406 funding. The density or development bonus revenues actually are for affordable housing and open space. So I've been working with the directors for Parks and Community Services and Community Planning and Development to figure out an approach for how to fund those. We have 10 years and geographic criteria that we'll work through and bring back to council at a future time. So this is a summary of the allocations of this funding to date. We heard tonight from Monica about the operations and capital portion of the 1590. And as you may remember, in September, an additional allocation to Arch Trust Fund was made. And they are actually in the process of reviewing applications now, and we'll be back in the first quarter of 2024 to present funding recommendations. So again, we're looking at these two fund sources for the strategic opportunity fund. So I'm going to actually skip forward one slide and then come back. So what is the Strategic Opportunity Fund? So it's an opportunity for us to have criteria selected in a process to go out to property owners and developers to say we want to invest in affordable housing, either to create it or to preserve it. There would be the housing that we would fund, again, would meet the criteria of the funding levels of AMI and specific populations, and it would be for the life of the project. The approach that we're looking at taking, and we thank you for your previous input on the prioritization around affordable housing, because we know that every level, every type of affordable housing, just like every level of middle housing and other things are really important. We heard from council in the past that preservation was really important. And as we continue this conversation with the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee, we also looked at the prioritizations of, I call it small TOD, so meaning not just the project, the TOD, but any transit-oriented development near transit, and community-based partnerships, which is really about working with those that provide space for nonprofits, community-based organizations, and our faith-based organizations. So, and now skipping ahead, we also are looking at providing additional funding if the project provides additional elements such as over and above the sustainability requirements, equitable requirements, et cetera. So this will help us to reach some other goals we have. For instance, the ground floor commercial in Central Issaquah, the missing middle and the housing strategy work plan, or even, again, nonprofit space dedicated that is mentioned in our city strategic plans. So how would this work? So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We would utilize the combined funders application that multiple agencies use in the county, and also add an Issaquah addendum, which specifically asks about the things that are important to us. We'd work with ARCH staff to help us review and bring out a recommendation, bring that to the Economic Vitality Commission, Safety, Services, and Park, and then to full council for approval. So this is not anything we decide today is not going to be set in stone and you'll never see it again. You will see it again. Most importantly, people ask, well, what can we get for our approximately $2.1 million? And unfortunately, I can't say that right now. But I gave you from the 2022 ARCH annual report. This is a summary of how much they funded per project. And again, it's really hard to say per unit award because you can see it ranges widely, but we will work with ARCH to make sure that the per unit funding is not out of line with what is in the region. And also, again, it will come back to City Council. So I promise I will not come back and say one unit for $2.1 million, but it will be in line within this range. And and every project is different. And so, you know, there's certain things that, again, the City of Bellevue's project is in a TOD. So more expensive land, higher community benefit, all that kind of stuff. So those things will be accounted for and presented to you to make that decision at the time. But we can set this up, but the really important thing is how do we get there, right? Because we really want to make sure that this funding gets into the community. And the biggest word on this slide is property. And so you all know we do not have a bunch of vacant land waiting for development to happen. So really, after we finalize this, my job is to go out and to do a really robust door knocking, talking to property owners who either have underutilized property or that I know will be looking at or could be looking at redevelopment in the future. I was at the Housing Washington conference last week and I gave my card out to anybody who would listen to me and talked about how important we prioritize affordable housing here and we want to start those conversations. So it really is about working with our partners in CPD, working with ARCH, working with anybody and everybody will listen to us about affordable housing and starting to plant those seeds so that we can make those connections. And I know that, you know, one faith-based organization has already been in contact with you about wanting to do affordable housing, and I've started to work with them. And we have another one that we're starting that same conversation. So this is a long path, but we are really excited to kind of get moving on this. So next steps. And so we plan to with input from tonight, come back to City Council on December 4th on the consent agenda to formalize the policy approach for this program. And then the next steps and the timing, again, is a longer process. So we will start to really do some outreach around this program. Developers, when they, or property owner would apply for this funding, again, would return to City Council. So that's an overview of the next steps for funding altogether. So we hope that we can move forward with this if any input from City Council. Thank you.
Any questions for Jen? Councilmember Joe.
Thank you for that presentation. I appreciate your efforts to bring affordable housing to Issaquah. Have we thought about the size of the project? In other words, when we think about affordable housing at 60% AMI, we would like to see, big progress whenever we can of 200 units or 50 units, whatever we can take a big chunk out of. But have we thought about opening that as well to people that might want to do an ADU on their property and be willing to have a 60% AMI requirement on there? Would they be eligible to apply for this funding as well?
Yeah, sure. It would be creation or preservation of affordable housing. So if somebody wanted to take an apartment community now and create or an ADU now or build an ADU for that purpose, yes. So again, we would look at how much they're asking for and how they would be doing that. Now, we would also want to make sure that there are things in place to make sure a single property owner has the ability to monitor and maintain that affordable housing, because it would need to stay there for the rest of its life. And so making sure that they have the things in place for that. So there would be maybe some different criteria or things to look at for a single property owner or one who has just a few units versus a larger one. But we need it at every single size of project and quantity. So.
Okay, I was hoping that would be the answer. And I think that if we have the affordability criteria run with the land and title, maybe that could work. But we do run into a problem in the sense that the ADU is not necessarily a separate lot at that point. So there are a number of things that I will leave to people that are far more versed in the area to sort out. But thank you for that answer. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Okay, we're moving right along. Appreciate this. So we've got a direction. Deputy Council President Hall.
I do have a question. I'm sorry. The fund outcome slide that showed the Arts Trust Fund and the Bellevue Housing Stability Fund. So if we were to say yes as council, we do agree with the strategic opportunity fund policy approach, then we try to figure out what the kind of outcome would be in terms of number of units, amount per reward at the December meeting, or did I hear that right? Or?
So we would come back to the December meeting on consent to say, proceed with creating this program. Here's the application process. I can say that if council wants us to say we will spend no more than $100,000 per unit, provide that input now, or a certain amount. Again, we're going to work with Arch. That we are not going to come and recommend something that's out of line with what is appropriate for that project. Every project has something a little unique, and so we know with the TOD project that we're currently doing is a little unique, different than maybe something we built on a church property. So I don't think Arch, and I don't think our Economic Vitality Commission nor our City Council Committee would say, sure, pay $5 million, yeah, right, $500,000 per unit. But I think that's part of the discussion as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
And if I can add, the crux of the Deputy Council President's question is really what's been driving this whole process from a staff's perspective. And that is, we need to have a framework. Otherwise, developers will come to us and say, Issaquah, if you don't give me X amount of dollars, you're never going to get anything here. And so what we want to be able to go back to a developer and say, fine, here's the criteria that we need. We're going to use accepted metrics to measure what you're producing as a developer, how much you're bringing to the table, what other partners you're going to have, so that the tax dollars that Issaquah is investing in this is appropriate. Is there a precise number to the answer? No, but there is a good framework, because otherwise we're going to get, woe is me, it's too expensive to develop here, you got all these fees, and you have to give us X amount of dollars. And that is not where the administration wants to put ourselves, wants to put the city council. We want there to be a framework that says this is what we expect if you're going to develop here. If this meets your framework, then welcome. If it doesn't, then perhaps we're not the best fiscal partner for you.
Councilmember Martz?
Are we doing questions right now or feedback? Thank you.
I love that response. Just shut it all down. Okay. Can you go to the direction needed slide? Maybe. Kind of. Yeah. Okay. So before we get everybody's feedback on that, I'm going to see if there is anybody online for public comment. If you're on the phone, *3. If you'd like to make a comment and you're on a computer or smartphone, raise your hand and I will check with the clerks and see if we've got anybody interested in a comment.
Yeah, it doesn't look like our virtual attendees interested in making comment.
Okay, well, we still appreciate that they attend and listen and all of that. So, I am wondering, maybe we want to take it section by section. I was thinking kind of how we went through the presentation. So I don't see anything here on operational funding, but I'm just going to kind of call that out. Then I'm going to do policy and regulation, then capital. Any direction on the operational funding, which was the stuff we heard from Monica? Councilmember Hunt.
Great work. Really great, especially here, you know, how life-changing this program is. And I had asked that question about communications. And the reason I asked the question is because, and I understand there's going to need to be a balance. We don't want to promote it widely and be, you know, have too much on our plate. At the same time, I think that there are community members who see people struggling, see individuals experiencing homelessness, and would like to know what resources are available, and would like to know that the city has these, and make sure that that help gets to those people that need those resources. And based on hundreds of conversations, I don't think that community members know about these programs. And so I think to get the word out about these programs within Issaquah, so that we are serving Issaquah residents, I do think it would be good to let people know, so when they see somebody that needs help, they know that there are some resources. So that would be my feedback. Again, great work. Thank you.
Thanks. Deputy Council President Hall.
Trying to think about exactly how to frame this. Yeah, I wanted to touch really quickly on the behavioral health program too. Not necessarily something that we would do in the immediate future, but something that I would like us all to be a little bit mindful of moving forward. We have our behavioral health program here in Issaquah. Eastside Fire and Rescue has their Core Connect referral program too. I think if there's value in regionalization for fire emergency service, there's got to be value in regionalization for crisis care emergency service too. So I think maybe starting to think about how we would frame a conversation about potentially coming together, collaborating in new ways. I know there's some duplication of services that happens every now and then. I know Core Connect did share a couple examples where they showed up one time after a firefighter, and the previous day, someone from Issaquah's behavioral health program had been there. So I think there are potentially ways, and I know we're deeply collaborating between the two organizations, or at least that's what we're being told by Eastside Fire. But maybe there are new ways in the future for us to kind of come together and think about that. Anyways, something to churn on and think about.
Great. Well, I love that idea. I think the other thing that I will say is looking at hiring for the emergency housing program, we had a slew of applicants and got to really pick and choose and create this strong staffing situation. So I'd love to kind of check back in like a 2 or 3 month period. If we're still experiencing issues with hiring with our current requirements, either looking further into that conversation with partnering with Eastside Fire and Rescue, or understanding, much like we did with IPD, where are the problems and what adjustments do we need to make in order to address those. Any other comments on operations? Okay, I'm going to move over to policy and regulation. So here we've got, does the City Council agree with moving forward with the development regulations, analyses, what are the priorities pursue, and we've got housing strategy 6 and 8 listed down there. Anyone want to start? Go ahead, Deputy.
I'll be really quick on this kind of my first preliminary thoughts. Looking over the Eco Northwest report again too, it talks about how Issaquah's peer cities have been largely delivering their affordable housing units through inclusionary zoning requirements, but then it goes on to say that these cities have also enacted those extensive MFTE programs, and the pairing of that, or the pairing of inclusionary zoning or MFTE with the new parking requirements, are actually what made it feasible for developers to build. So I mean, for me, those are the two things that come up in terms of what we want to prioritize: the inclusionary zoning requirements and the MFTE program. And so the idea would be, council's giving direction to say, we look into these things and we come back and have staff does their due diligence on kind of what could be done there, and then we have more conversation.
Correct.
Thanks.
Councilmember DiMichele, then Councilmember Marth.
Okay. Just a little clarification, because we are looking at the Pioneer project as well, and I'm wondering if Jen Davis-Hayes can, the reason I'm asking or referring to that is the multifamily tax exemption program. We're also going to be analyzing that for the Pioneer project. So it seems to me like we could combine this work with that work, or it should feed into that other program.
Yeah, so the Pioneer project is going to be looking at MFTV very minutely and specifically, where the MFTE program analysis would say, does it make sense to include on, in the urban core only, or to do this or do that, and have a higher level picture. So yes, Arch will help us with both of those. And so I think that, as well as the analysis we did a long time ago about the TOD, will feed into those conversations. So
can I ask a follow-up? So I'm really, interested in getting that Pioneer project in place so that we can move ahead with that. So is there any chance that this is going to delay? Good.
We're on a different timeline. So we plan to come back November 4th, 6th to City Council after a PPC and Economic Vitality joint meeting that looks at options that Arch is developing. So yes, we will be back.
Oh, great. All right. Thanks.
Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. So I want to use a word that people don't use a lot: credulity. People use the term incredulous, but they don't use its antonym, credulity. A tendency to be too ready to believe that something is real or true. So I would ask that we guard against unrestrained credulity as we look at folks who want to come build housing in our community. We don't need housing in Issaquah. We have generated a massive amount of market rate housing in the last 20 years, which is why our current growth targets are so modest, right? We used to have huge numbers, and we delivered on those huge numbers. And so what we need is affordable housing and workforce housing. How do we measure that? You can get 10 units at 60% AMI for the same investment as 600 units at 99% AMI, but getting 600 units at 99% of AMI would do no good for anyone. So what we really need to see is safeguards and rails around proposals that tell us what we will get for our investment in MFTE and inclusionary housing and just raw dollars, right? We know what we need. We need affordable housing and workforce housing. We need to talk in terms of quantities and AMI, and this needs to be built into any proposals that we get so that our community knows what they get in the end. But back to my thing about we don't need regular, plain old standard regular housing. If people don't want to build in our community without us giving away the farm, without them being able to build without parking, to pick an example, if they're not going to build affordable or workforce housing, then don't build here. We got enough market rate housing. If you can't do it the way things are, go build someplace else. But come here and build affordable housing and workforce housing as part of your housing developments, and I'll welcome that. Thanks.
So I'm going to jump on that and say, I think we as a previous council with Housing Strategy 6 and 8 identified two of our needs. One was developer-built affordable housing, which is Housing Strategy 6, and the other is a diversity of housing. And in many ways, the diversity of housing addresses a lot of the needs of the community, whether that's starter homes, single room occupancy, other smaller units that will have more natural affordability, or something that somebody can get into with a slightly lower income. And so I think I would quibble with that concept that the only thing that we need is just affordable housing. The other thing to recognize, and I was talking to the rallies the other day, is that when the Atlas project went in and delivered a whole bunch of market rate housing, they, with some of their older housing stock, were not able to increase prices as much. And so supply in itself also delivers some effects of affordable housing. And I think if we can get that supply in a way that is a diversity of housing, which is what we had established with Housing Strategy 6 and 8, that would be really important. My reading is that the math has come in pretty darn clear on that Eco Northwest report. I think they did the math on saying whether inclusionary zoning would work with our current requirements. No, it doesn't. That's one of the reasons we haven't gotten the housing. And so I'm really eager to utilize the math that they have done to say, okay, how can we get the affordable housing and how can we get the diverse type of housing? When I look at Housing Strategy 8, I am 110% against incentivizing courtyard housing in multifamily high. That is absolutely, I don't even understand why we would go for something that has so many fewer dwelling units per acre in that case. If I was going to incentivize cottage housing or courtyard housing, I would want to look at it in lower density zones as a way to increase the number of units and provide a diversity of housing in that way without losing the potential highest and best use of multifamily high. And then my other comments on there. For Strategy 8, the other thing that I would potentially consider is pre-reviewed designs for ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes that could streamline the permit process. If we had something that was pre-reviewed that could potentially shorten that timeline, that could be a way to deliver some of that diversity of housing at a lower cost. And then as much as the report didn't really look at those single-family zones because 1110 addresses it, I think there's a difference between saying we check the box with ADUs count and we don't have to look at anything else, and really addressing what are the true opportunities for having compact housing in a variety of neighborhoods that serve the needs of our community. So I would be really interested in having a conversation about what are currently those single-family zones that now allow duplexes, and I don't even know what to call them anymore, but consider whether duplex, triplex, quadplex style or cottage housing, and not just those ADUs, are good approaches there. And then for strategy 6, there was kind of an asterisk in the report that said, this doesn't address the high water table issues. And I agree, it doesn't. And I think much like if we adjust our inclusionary zoning requirements without also addressing structured parking, the math doesn't work out. Well, the math doesn't work out if we don't address the costs of that. And so I fear that if we're not going to address that, we're saying we're doing good things without really recognizing all of the barriers. So I'd like to understand that, whether there are solutions we can do, like pre-building some infrastructure, or anything that understands what some of those costs to developers are in a high water table area. And then the last final thing I will say is the report showed that multifamily development slowed starting in 2018. And I have a horrible memory on dates, but I want to say that was the time period that we put in the structured parking and some of the inclusionary zoning and all of that. So I think it would be important for us to recognize what did we do that caused the problem, and not just utilize the math that says, and here's how you can get what you want, so that we're really, really, truly sure we're changing what the development pattern responded to. Councilmember Hunt.
I have a couple of questions actually first. So on Housing Strategy 8, these listed ideas, are these what the staff recommended for council to consider for prioritization?
This is what came out of the Eco Northwest report.
Okay, so there is one. Eco Northwest also looked at the micro units. Yeah, sorry. And so the micro units, they do have recommendations for that. And so did the staff not consider? I mean, but those are not here. So that's my question. Why are those not here?
So recommendations for the micro units were to look at the parking numbers in general, and then the structured parking for micro units as well. Those are going to be, those two pieces are going to be included with the parking study that happens in 2024, which is why it's not shown here.
Okay. So my take on this is that I think the recommendations on incentivizing courtyard housing and reevaluating the impervious coverage and the incentivizing cottage housing, I think that in some cases, so we're currently in a bit of a holding pattern on the parking because we have a plan for doing a parking study and being thoughtful about that, and that will unlock a lot of these other policy discussions. And I think also in terms of your base and treble analogy, you know, that's a big piece. Once we figure that out, then the other adjustments, there's less, I think, the parameter space gets a little bit smaller. So I think that will be helpful, but the incentivizing courtyard housing and the reevaluating impervious coverage and the incentivizing cottage housing, those ones, I think, my take on it was if it's in locations where it's zoned multifamily high, but we aren't currently seeing housing, maybe this is a middle, a step that would be available to, or would be amenable to the market. I'm interested that Eco Northwest made those recommendations. I would like to consider those, and they seem like something that we can consider prior to the parking study, because they're really separate. Also, I agree that if we're already seeing, if the point is to get diversity of housing and we're already seeing a lot of diversity of housing in that area, then that doesn't, and I don't think incentivizing it is necessary. But we do have, for example, Central Issaquah, where we have areas zoned multifamily high, I believe, that don't have housing. And so in that case, it isn't that we're seeing exactly what we want and, have high density. And so maybe this is incentivizing housing as a step in the right direction. So again, I was interested in those because they seem like something we can consider now, and I would like to take action on these recommendations. And for parking, we're waiting on that. And also maybe we could limit the conversation to those places where we think this kind of housing would take us a step in the right direction.
Councilmember DiMichele.
So this is a sort of a continuation of a conversation that we had at the Safety Services and Parks meeting. I am really interested in the multifamily tax exemption program and the analysis. Right now, if we say to developers, if you want incentives and if you want this and that, you don't build here. Well, the builders are saying, okay, we won't build here. And they haven't. We have, if I'm correct, Jen, correct me if I'm not, but we have no affordable housing projects going on in the central area. And so I think the discussion that we had at the committee meeting was multi-family tax exemption is one way that we can incentivize that. It's certainly a way that we need to analyze. We need to know what we are giving up, because we don't want to give everything away, but we have to come to some kind of accommodation with the developers, because they are just saying, no, we're not going to build in Issaquah because it doesn't pencil out. And I believe that that this is a negotiation. It's a different kind of negotiation in that, you have one side of people on one side of the table and people on the other side. That's not the situation. They are simply saying, we're not going to come to Issaquah. And so we have to sort of figure out how we're going to meet them at a place where it pencils out, where it makes sense for the city, but it also makes sense for them, so that we can start to meet our affordable housing goals for the Central Issaquah plan. And right now, we're not meeting them. So are there other ways that we can incentivize that? Are there other ways that we can meet the needs of the developers? Let's explore those as well. It doesn't have to be multifamily tax exemption, but it has to be something that helps them come to the place where they can afford to build in the central area. We're not meeting our goals right now with the programs that we have. So anyway, that's kind of the discussion we've already had, but I just think that it needs to be emphasized that right now we're not meeting our goals. We have to figure out how to do that, or we're not going to have affordable housing in the Central Issaquah area.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. First, Council President, I'd like to thank you for your work on the Affordable Housing Council through King County and Claudia Balducci's committee. You were instrumental in putting together the numbers that are put forward as part of this plan for affordable housing and permanent emergency housing and temporary emergency housing. I'm probably getting the names wrong, but the fact is that the county is recommending that we put 868 units, 30 to 50% AMI, 460 units, 50 to 80% AMI, between now and 2044. And if we're building 0 a year, we're not going to get there. If we're building 100 a year, maybe we get there, but we're not even close to building 100 a year. My point is that the county has, we never want to just bow to the county. And to take Councilor DiMichelle's point, it is part of negotiation. How can we make a good faith effort to get to these numbers that have been put forward as part of the CPP from the county on the jurisdictional housing needs? So as we look at the different elements that are being put forward, I think we need to open our minds a little bit to the different ideas and see what can come forward. So I appreciate the fact that Housing Strategy 6 and Housing Strategy 8 have both numbers behind them and then historical reflection, so to speak, that we haven't met our historic numbers in those areas for affordable housing. So I don't think anything's off the table for us to consider right now, and I appreciate all the work that's been done. I just hope that the council members would all open their minds and go ahead and think creatively as we try to tackle this problem going forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Martz.
So I'm not, I don't really understand where the difference is up on the dais. I think everybody wants affordable and workforce housing. I think maybe where there's some difference is, this thing about, a variety of housing or a diversity of housing. I mean, the multifamily housing that's for sale right now in Issaquah is going for $800,000 to $1.1 million, right? That's nothing like workforce housing. That's not a thing that a teacher and a cop or a city employee and their spouse can afford, right? So we don't need more of that. What we need is to think about investing our money that we've told people we're going to use and are required by law to use for workforce and affordable housing, to put into workforce and affordable housing. So let's do that. I'm really not sure. This is a weird meeting because I'm not sure where the discord is up here. Like Councilmember DeMichelle, you and I normally agree on a lot of stuff. I'm not sure how we're disagreeing at this point. I kind of think we both want affordable and workforce housing, but I don't want to put money into market rate housing. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And so I just want us to have some guide rails that if we're going to invest the public's money, that we know what we're going to get. Thanks.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the disconnects is right now we're talking about the policy and regulation side of things. We're not talking about the money that we have set aside that has to be used for that, like under 50%. That's the next set of feedback on capital funding. So, yeah.
It is 9:44.
Yep.
It seems the policy questions need some more work.
Yep.
Would recommend that the council send this back to Services, Safety, and Parks. They have a meeting coming up at the end of the month on October 24th. Perhaps the committee could continue working there. We are planning on bringing the Pioneer program back at a regular council meeting. Council leadership discussed that a week or so ago, and that really goes between two committees, and so council leadership suggested it coming back to the full council on November 6th. Potentially, if there's some resolution at Services, Safety, and Parks on the policy question, that could also come back on November 6th. If there's not, then it could remain in committee.
Okay, I appreciate keeping to the timeline. I have a slightly different approach that I think policy and regulation, because we're talking about zoning and potential areas of like multifamily tax exemption that deal with the code, I would suggest that goes to planning, development, and environment. I think the capital funding going to services, safety, and parks might make more sense. So maybe we can talk offline.
And we're hoping that we can get capital out tonight.
Okay.
And if it's to the council's wishes which committee the other matter goes to, but
okay.
I don't think you're going to get to a conclusion.
Policy and regulations, any feedback, or does somebody want to connect with me offline if there are strong feelings about where it should go? And I will connect with Wally on Wednesday morning at our regular meeting. Deputy Council President Hall.
Just super quickly, I agree with that approach. I just wanted to quickly say, though, that I thought Tola's point, Councilmember Marks' point, my apologies, was a good one. We are talking about policies and regulations, but multifamily tax exemption is essentially giving up money that we would bring in. So it is a cost. So I just wanted to say that's a good point that we should definitely.
Councilman Ray?
Were you just asking where we thought that the policy thing should go?
Yeah,
I think it should go to planning, development, environment. It's a planning thing, not a
Okay.
services thing.
great. So we've got that. Sounds like it needs more baking. Capital funding. Can we bring something up other than this direction needed that shows kind of what that capital funding, like recommendation or?
I'm sorry, you wanted to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was something that has a picture or something. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, picture focus. Or actually, can you go to slide 24 that shows the costs?
This? Fund outcome?
One
Or-
more? The sources.
Oh, the sources, yeah. Sorry, I don't have the numbers
Yeah,
on
no, you're fine. Okay, so this is discussing kind of what we want to do with House Bill 1590 funding and some of these other things that are listed here. We've got money, they have requirements tied to it. It went to Services, Safety, and Parks. I think you guys, or maybe I'm wrong, somebody talked about the, what are we calling the program?
Strategic Opportunity Fund.
Strategic Opportunity Fund.
We'll name it something.
And so the feedback and concept that you're looking for here is, where is
next
that
slide.
sheet?
Next slide is agreement with the fund, the
The
program.
priority program types. And so if this evening at the Committee of the Whole, if the council, this has been to the Services, Safety, and Parks, there was general agreement. We bring it back to the COW because we were bringing all the housing issues. If there's general agreement with the full council, we will put this in a policy, one page, something simple. It'll be on your consent calendar on November 4th. December 4th or November? December 4th for final action. So that's what
Okay.
we're recommending this evening.
Concept is create a strategic opportunity fund, and then that gives staff the ability to kind of go back, and we still need to define what some of those guardrails, or do you want feedback on guardrails?
We're saying preservation, transit-oriented development, and community-based partnerships are the guardrails. The sources and uses are by statute, which is what slide back, or two slides back.
Well, the 1590 and the 1406,
Right,
the
but I think
red.
the other slide had the
Oh, yes, the
restrictions.
requirements.
Yep.
That. So those are the funding guide rails. The programmatic guide rails are the 3 slides further up. One back, I'm sorry. Up. Oh, we were on that. Those are the programmatic guardrails. We'll put that into one document and have it for council's final approval on a consent agenda in December.
Okay, now that we have clarity over what the question is, what's the general feedback on any of that? Councilmember Martz, then Councilmember Hunt.
And I will say, despite appearances to the contrary, there was general unanimity out of Services, Safety, and Parks that this was a good idea.
Councilmember Hunt.
I agree. This is a good list and good guardrails for how to prioritize these. I was thinking on transit-oriented development, which is the transit with the small t, so it's just development around transit, which will make life more affordable for folks as well. That we could also consider not just current transit, because we have lost some of our public transit, unfortunately, after the cuts that were made during COVID. And so I do think as we look for transit-oriented development, just considering where we expect there to be transit in the future, nobody has a crystal ball, but I still think that's important because this housing will be there for a very long time, 50 to 100 years, and the transit we imagine, will change over that time.
Councilmember DiMichele.
I clearly agree with Councilmember Martz that there was great agreement at the committee.
Dick. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I will just be the stickler here and go, I'm sure there is something else behind those numbers, but if Arch is producing new units at $9,000 per unit, and like the other side of the coin is Bellevue at $150,000 when they're doing it internally, that seems to suggest to me that there's efficiency in a group that can bring together money from other sources. And so I just have some hesitation on that. I'd like to know what some of the other cities are doing with this type of money. And I would like to give Arch the opportunity to say, hey, if you had a dedicated set of funds from the city, what could you do with it, either in the city or out? So I'm just a little bit of a question mark there.
And we don't disagree with you. And remember that the council's already given an additional pot of money to Arch for that. We feel that this council should control what housing is here. And we feel that this council, with the aid of your able administration, should form partnerships. And Arch may very well be one of those partners on every single project we do, potentially. But we're recommending that we have that flexibility, rather than have one nonprofit partner. And I think that's not unlike what Bellevue does.
Bellevue is the only other east side city that has the 0.1%. And so that nobody else collects that on the east side. But I would also like to mention, again, this is hard to compare because some of the units are beds in a shelter under Arch's thing. And so applicants come in saying, I already got funding from all these other locations. Obviously, Arch helps supports them along the way, and they would do the same for our project. So Arch doesn't have additional money, and then, you know, again, it's really challenging, but I wanted to present kind of what the information is. And we did provide, and I can send a link again to the annual report, which shows what all of these are, what the funding for each of them are, so you can see how varied they are. And so again, when we're probably going to do 1, 2, maybe 3 projects, right? And it'll be very specific, and you'll see very clearly the numbers, again, that Arch will provide some feedback about this is within the line of what we would fund. So
great. I appreciate those answers.
And you will have Lindsay Masters here on October 23rd, presenting her annual budget and program. So and we're going to put that on regular business. And so there'll be an opportunity to, Kristen, am I saying all that right? Okay.
Great.
So we'll have additional, before this comes back as a final decision.
Okay. And then the only other piece of feedback, because that answers my question, so I'm feeling okay about moving forward on that. I would love to have a goals and outcomes chart for this type of project. If we're going to spend money understanding what the goals and outcomes, like we did with Title 18, that gives a sense of what we expect from it, why we're doing it, what our specific, criteria. I think that would be a useful way of approaching how we consider projects. Anybody else? Okay, I'm sorry we ran over the 9:30, but we have done good work. We are servant leaders doing the work. Do you have what you need?
yes.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
for the almost 10 p.m. We do have good of the order, and I am supposed to mention, I'm trying to find where it is, the Metroflex pilot ride-along. On Friday, we received an email inviting us to attend a special ride-along to experience the Metroflex pilot program. New service begins on October 16th, and will provide the on-demand option. So please check your emails. It came in on Friday. They're looking to schedule things for October 18th or 19th. There's a sign-up sheet, and then there's also that opportunity before the meeting on the 23rd that's going to be at the community center. I don't know that's going to be necessarily ride-along so much as photo and talk to some of the Metro folks, but I was supposed to highlight that. Anybody else go to the order? What? Oh, pumpkin derby. It's after Salmon Days. Everybody wants a pumpkin that goes all the way down and does not fall off. We really have some goals there. Yeah. So just get in contact with me. Otherwise, I'm going to develop something, and it is going to be super streamlined and not even any pretty, but it will get down the chute. So Councilmember Joe.
Just really quickly, I think we all received an email for a celebration of SR 18 and 90 on November 8th. If you're going to go, please get the RSVP back to the council member from, what city? Maple Valley, I think it is. Yeah. as soon as you can. It's not a hard deadline, but we should be at least kind and thoughtful about our responses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting closed at 9:56 p.m. Thank you.